Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. Today we are talking about a debate between Billy Carson and Wes Huff, who is a Christian. We're going to watch this debate. I'm going to react to this debate. And the reason why I'm going to do this is, if you're not familiar with my channel, I discuss hidden knowledge. Billy Carson also is hidden knowledge adjacent. And I'm an ex-Christian. And of course, Wes Huff is Christian. So there is a lot of crossover here. I'm curious to see where this goes. And I'm going to say right off the bat, I'm not the biggest fan of Billy Carson, but I haven't seen much of him. So this is going to be the first time really seeing a lot of Billy. But I just want to make it clear that one of the reasons why I'm not a super huge fan of Billy Carson, for example, is the fact that he doesn't do a lot of research. Like the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. He promotes the Emerald Tablets of Thoth as though they were real, but they are clearly fake. They were created by someone named Maurice Doriel. His real name is actually Claude Doggins. He changed his name, and he said that he found these Atlantean tablets that were 36,000 years old, that were written in an Atlantean language that spoke to his mind, and he translated them, but then he had to give them to ascended masters, so he couldn't actually show them to anyone. Clearly, Maurice was making all this up. And it only takes 5 minutes of Googling to find this out, but Carson promotes these as though they were real. By the way, that's not the same thing as the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. That is an actual ancient document. That has nothing to do with the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Just to make that clear. So anyway, just to say, we'll see how crazy this is going to be. A little crazy, I think. And so I'm not a fan of Christianity. I'm an ex-Christian, clearly. I am a fan of hidden knowledge, but I have a feeling that Carson may not present the material in such a great way. Anyway, I've heard that apparently he gets destroyed in this debate. We'll see. I haven't seen it. I'm curious. We'll see where it goes. We'll see where it leads. Oh, one other quick thing that I want to make something clear right off the bat before we get started, because I believe that Billy Carson and Wes Huff take a historical approach to all this. So I just want to make it clear that for me, I don't take a historical approach. I take a psychological, philosophical, and esoteric approach. What this basically means is when I look at these stories, I look at them to see how it affects the psyche and what it means and implies for us, how we can learn from these stories. Not like if a certain person actually existed or not. For example, like when it comes to Jesus, I don't care whether Jesus existed or not. What I do is I look at the stories surrounding Jesus and see if they are look at the interpretations that limit us by saying, oh, we're dirty, rotten, sinful beings that have to pray to a God to be saved, or the liberating interpretation, which is Gnostic, that we are all divine sparks and Jesus was just trying to help us realize that we're all divine so that we could break free from the material realm. So anyway, I just want to make that clear. I believe they take a historical approach. I take a psychological approach. I think that's because I care about transforming consciousness, not whether these old stories actually happened or not. And you might be wondering, well, I thought you said the Emerald Tablets of Thoth were fake, so then why would you care about stuff like that? I care because you have to also be truthful. So when it comes to something like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, right? I don't believe it was written by Mary. I don't believe the Gospel of Judas was written by Judas. And I'll straight up say that. I won't promote it as though these things actually happened. I'll say these are just stories. And so if Billy were to say like the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, like, oh, these are just stories, I wouldn't have a problem with it. It's that he promotes it as though it were true. Anyway, let's just get started. Let's see what happens. We're going to pull this up. Oh, by the way, as usual, remember, become a member if you enjoy my work. It helps out a lot. Check out my book, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. This is very apropos for what we're talking about today because it goes through how to destroy limiting belief systems and how to think logically and clearly to reach higher consciousness. We can stay logical and rational while we reach higher consciousness. Doesn't have to be a bunch of woo-woo and crazy stuff. It's a legitimate state of awareness that we can reach through exercising the powers of our mind. Okay, so let's start here. I'm going to bring it up and hopefully you all will be able to hear well. All right, so we're going to get started. So there's Wes Huff and there is Billy Carson. The guy in the middle is, I guess, the moderator. Again, I haven't seen much of this. What I have heard is that the moderator is really annoying. I don't know if I've heard that. If he is, we might skip through the parts that he talk his parts. I don't know, but we'll see.
All right, what's up, everyone? And I'm trying to move this stuff. And yeah, they'll do an awesome job editing this intro to make it way more fancy than this. But I'm here with my good man, Billy Carson, who I've known Billy personally for some years now.
Yeah.
I will say, I think it's cool that Wes has those old pages behind him. I don't know. I just like them. I would like some of those. It would be cool. Have those in the background. Anyway.
Solid friend, great character, businessman. He's been on Elevating Beyond last time, sharing your whole story behind the story. And what you hugely specialize in as well, you just came back from Egypt, is like the emerald tablets. You've been studying those since what, you were like 6 or something? I think?
No, not the emerald tablets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the emerald tablets I've been studying for the last probably 10 years.
Okay.
See, when it comes to like he's been studying the emerald tablets for the last 10 years. See, the emerald tablets are so clearly fake that there's a couple options. Either he knows they're fake and he's promoting them as if they were real, which means he's a liar, or he actually believes that they're real, which shows that his critical thinking skills are very poor. That's my concern. That's my concern with Billy. I may agree with some things that Billy has to say. I don't know. But right off the bat, see, this just raises red flags. You have to look out for this stuff. When you're trying to shape the way you view reality, you have to think critically and understand where this information is coming from.
Okay.
Yeah. But since I was 6, I was studying aerospace technology, which then led me into understanding more about advanced technologies and then finding the link between advanced technology and ancient civilizations. And going on literally a 25-year, what's that, 27-year now, goodness, trek around the world. Been around the world now over 18 times. Last year, spent 9 months in hotels.
I remember.
As you know, you were my witness, leaving this big old mansion behind and not going home at all. And
grind.
Traveling nonstop to these ancient sites to get the information hands-on.
Okay. And that was weird. I just heard a little chime. Wes, you there?
He's frozen.
Oh no, Wes is frozen.
Oh.
Wes, come back. Oh.
Be too easy if it works perfect, right?
Yeah, I know. What is he calling in on? What is that app?
Maybe let's skip forward a little bit. Go. Oh my. Oh.
Hello.
There we go.
Wes, we got you back on. So I'll introduce Wes too, but yeah, what I was just saying real quick, Billy, too, is I also a shared belief, I think, too, with you, with God, is I also believe, I know God is within me too.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and I don't believe that it's like you have to do 20 circles in the sand and
Right.
Well, I believe that God is within me too. I believe that I am God. I believe that you are God. I believe that we are all God. That's why in Exodus 3:14, God says his name is I am, or in Hebrew it's Achea. And this means I am. And so if someone asks you, what is the name of God? Or if someone asks you, who is God? You reply with God's name. Who is God? I am. Another really cool thing is that some say that Achea could be interpreted as I will be. So some say it's more accurate. Instead of I am, some say it's more accurate that it's I will be, which is also cool. Who is God? I will be. Anyway, long story short, I believe in God. I'm not an atheist, but I believe that we are God expressing itself in a multitude of ways to explore its own transformations, to understand itself, to understand ourselves better.
Do a ritual to that was through my connection with Jesus, where I know throughout my life that's been when things are tough, it's like the strength of God is literally within me.
Right.
Where we do agree on, where a lot of the heresies and stuff through over religious practices would be no, you have to come through the head of this church.
Do you guys want me to skip this
blah,
guy
blah, blah,
talking,
you know.
Right.
or do you want me to
And
keep it?
personally, and we're about to get Wes on, so we can have two really
You want me to skip
smart
this guy?
people in this talk about
Yeah?
it. But I'm just breaking it down to my level
All right, let's
of my
skip this guy.
understanding for what was in Noah.
Oh wow, he does talk a lot, doesn't he?
I'm feeling Bill interesting.
Jeez.
I think they had why they want things were.
And if you listen to the podcast, the statement is according to the Sinai Bible. Okay, according to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible. And that Bible predates the King James version of the Bible, and the text there actually is about 12 to 14,000 differences between the Sinai Bible and the King James version of the Bible, which came much later. And then also one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which, according to some scholars, is a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married, which then, adds more, if that's true, it adds more to the hypothesis that maybe he wasn't crucified. I just personally believe that Jesus was an amazing human being. I don't think that he was the Son of God in the sense that he's God, but that we're all gods. As he said, ye are.
I agree with that. That's good so far. I don't know about these particular documents he's talking about, but the idea that Jesus Christ was an enlightened individual and that he wasn't exclusively the Son of God, that we are all God. I agree with this. I agree.
Gods, and that we're to do greater things in him.
Yeah, Christ did say that. Christ said that we would do greater things than him. And in a lot of the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus Christ basically says, when you understand my words, you will become me and I will become you. In the Gospel of Philip, it also says, when you understand this information, you will no longer be a Christian, you will be a Christ. So in the Gnostic Gospels, which are non-canonical, and I'm not claiming that they were written by the actual people that they're named after, but they contain an interpretation of Christ's sayings that are liberating. So remember, it's that psychological perspective rather than confining, which is the traditional Christian narrative that we're broken, dirty, flawed sinners that require the salvation of Christ. It strips your divinity away from you, whereas the Gnostic interpretation gives your divinity, allows you to unlock the divinity that's already within you. Anyway, I have a feeling I may agree with some things that Carson says, but just not the reasons why, or the facts that he gives are usually off base. But let's see. I don't know.
And I just personally believe that the return of the Christ is the return of the Christ consciousness.
I agree with this as well. So the second coming of Christ is not about a literal event. The second coming of Christ is a state of consciousness that is happening collectively. So it's a collective event. It's a collective event of many people reaching a higher state of consciousness known as Christ consciousness. Now, is that written in a book somewhere, word for word? No. But again, this is about taking a psychological, esoteric, and philosophical interpretation of these ideas. And that is what you get when you take a look at what was said in the Gnostic Gospels and extend that to today. So anyway, I agree with what Billy is saying so far.
When we can all achieve a certain level of knowledge, wisdom, passion, understanding, empathy, love,
Agreed.
that he came to this planet with.
Agreed.
And we get that in our mind and our consciousness, and we can act on that.
Yes.
Those incredible emotions and that understanding, that the whole world is going to transform instantaneously. And I think at the second coming is the coming of the Christ consciousness to the planet.
Yeah.
Not a human being flying back to Earth to save people.
Agreed.
That's just my personal understanding of how I've perceived it over many, many years of going through this information and going through all this text.
Agreed, 100%. I think Billy's completely on point there.
And Wes, I'm gonna let you respond to that. And again, I mean, this is everyone listening to the show. You know, I'm always like, challenge everything. Conclusion that this is yeah.
Yeah, well, first let me say I think it's really cool to not just be in the room proverbially with you, Billy, but be able to interact with you. Because I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, Toronto, Canada is a long way away from Florida. It's a little bit of a jaunt. But I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible called, I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out.
I think the problem and I'm just kind of preemptively talking here. I think that so far, because I like what Billy said. So Billy may have some good conclusions. It's just that the documents that he bases them on, I think are the issue. And again, anyway, let's just see where this goes.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus? Like the codex that comes. Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification, because so you can actually go and see Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library. So you can go and see it. It's on display. And the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I ask for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just it's a 4th century Greek manuscript. Mm-hmm. It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull?
See, so I'm not even familiar with Codex Sinaiticus or anything like that, but it wouldn't surprise me if Wes is correct based on the fact that the stuff that I have looked into Billy Carson is he doesn't research his stuff either very well, or he just misrepresents it, or just doesn't understand it. I'm liking some of the conclusions that Billy is coming to, but the problem is basing them on these very problematic documents as though they were real. Anyway, let's see.
Pull up a website with the viewers or listeners or whatever be able to see that.
Right now to make sure I have the version that I'm looking at.
While he's pulling that up too, like I keep saying to all the people that aren't scientists traveling the world and linguists, I don't even know how to pronounce it the right way, like me.
Yeah, linguists.
Cyanide, I keep thinking of cyanide, like the poison. Cyanide Bible. So
right.
Is that like a version? So from my own knowledge that I know, like when I really studied all this, what I thought was interesting about the Bible was how many different eyewitness. I studied C.S. Lewis back in the day.
Oh my goodness, this guy.
That's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with, there are 2 manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. I want to see what Billy has to say about the Gospel of Barnabas.
Found the text where,
and I want Billy to answer, and also I'm just curious, like the Sinai Bible, was that
Gospel of Barnabas. Found the text where I was referencing, actually, I was misquoted. I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Oh, I see. Okay. He didn't, I don't know about this Sinai Codex. He's talking about the Gospel of Barnabas. So the Gospel of Barnabas is a non-canonical gospel that has very Muslim themes. I'm not super familiar with it. I'm more familiar with the Gnostic Gospels, because when I look at these stories, I look at, okay, what stories allow us to help us elevate our consciousness? What stories can we learn from? So I'm not super interested in Gospels that don't help us do that. And so the Gospel of Barnabas, from what I understand, is more like Muslim influenced. And I believe that, yeah, it says that Jesus wasn't crucified. And I believe that it says that he's just a prophet or something like this. And it might be, there was recently this gospel has been going around, and I think it might be the Gospel of Barnabas. And it kept saying something like, is it like a 10,000? No, it says something like 1,000-year-old gospel. I forget. Anyway, it turned out that it's not very old. That might be this one. I'm not sure. Anyway, let's continue. I just know the Gospel of Barnabas definitely has like Muslim themes, and I believe considers Christ to be a prophet. Let's see.
Okay, yeah, well, so that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with, there are two manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery. And so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have two copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish. We see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to like around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidence.
So there's something very important that I want to point out here, and I think this is really key. Again, like I said, so far from what I've heard about Billy, about saying we're all God, trying to achieve Christ consciousness, etc. So I agree with these things. Billy, however, to back a lot of his stuff up, is using documents that are fake or forgeries, etc., which would be fine if he didn't try and pass them off if they were historically accurate. If he were to say, hey, there's this book, it has these stories in it, let's see how we can learn from them, that would be perfectly fine. That's what I do in the Gnostic Gospels. The Gnostic Gospels, like I've said, Gospel of Mary wasn't written by Mary, Gospel of Judas wasn't written by Judas, but we can learn from them. I'm not telling you guys, hey, here's this gospel that was literally written by Mary, and this, and this literally happened. They're allegories, it's symbolism, it's metaphor. Here's another good example. So Lilith is one of my favorite characters. She was Adam's first wife, who was made from the dust of the ground, like him. They were made from the same dust. She wasn't made from his rib. So in that sense, they were equal. And he demanded submission from her, and she didn't want to submit. She just wanted to be equal. She was like, no, let's be equal. He refused. And so she uttered the ineffable name of God, became this powerful being, and flew from the Garden of Eden. And then there's a longer story. She becomes like the mother of demons and the queen of the night. And she's a very powerful archetype for divine retribution, or not divine retribution, rebellion and the divine feminine. She's one of my favorite archetypes, very powerful, or archetypal images for the divine feminine and rebellion against oppression. So Lilith as a symbol represents the archetype or pattern of rebellion against oppression and the resurgence of the divine feminine. Archetype, Lilith is an archetype, a symbol that represents that archetype, that pattern. She didn't literally exist. So if we look where the story of Lilith came from, it came from a book called The Alphabet of Ben Sirach, which I think is a medieval manuscript. And I don't think the manuscript was even written to be taken seriously. I think parts of it were funny. Like there's later on in that manuscript, they talk about farts. I think some person is possessed by a demon that makes them fart a lot or something like that. Anyway, it's a weird book. But the point is not to look at I wouldn't, if Wes was like, oh, well, Lilith comes from this book that's clearly not accurate. Like that's not the point. The point is using these stories to find symbols that allow us to activate and access these archetypes within ourselves. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think some of the conclusions I've heard from Billy are on the right track. The problem is that he's trying to say a lot of these documents are real when they are not. Wes is right to say that these aren't real, but I don't agree with Wes that means that, I don't know, that they're useless or that it doesn't matter, right? Because again, I'm taking a psychological, philosophical, esoteric approach, which is about activating powers that we have within us through symbolic imagery and stories, etc. Not, because this document's older than that document. So what? If you have a super old document, right? Look at the Bible. The Bible is filled with genocide. Things that I can't say on YouTube. It's filled with unaliving of masses of people, forceful taking of women. It's full of horrible things. So much horrible things happen in the Bible. So you have this really, and then you have a text that, let's say is 500 years earlier, or not earlier, but 500 years later, that has empowering message of self-transformation and reaching the divine within you. One shouldn't go with the horrible version just because it's older than this other version. What you need to do is look at these things. See, there's a difference. You look at these stories through logic, reason, and the effect that they have on the psyche. Not which one is older or not. It doesn't matter, because none of this stuff actually happened. These are about stories that we can use to understand ourselves. And you can know that the God of the Bible doesn't exist because his attributes are logically inconsistent. They're internally inconsistent. So it doesn't matter. If you had a document that said 2 + 2 = 8, doesn't matter if it was a 36,000-year-old document written by Thoth. If it says 2 + 2 = 8, that's bullshit. It's not true. It doesn't matter how old it is or not. And that's what it comes, that's how we analyze these stories. Anyway, let's continue. I just want to make it clear because I think that it's important to realize this is about leveling up our consciousness, transforming ourselves. These are tools that we can use to do that. Doesn't matter how old these documents are or whatever. But it also doesn't look good if you're trying to pass them off as though they were real, because they're clearly not. Like if I was going around saying, oh, the Gospel of Judas was definitely written by Judas, you guys should call me out on that because it wasn't. And I'm not going to try and tell you that it was, but there is an amazing story in the Gospel of Judas. Anyway, let's continue.
That disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas, never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages.
I mean, he's right to call Billy out on this if Billy's claiming that it's legitimate.
And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian. and I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the...
See the difference, here's the difference in perspective. Someone like Wes and most Christians look and see, who said this? Did Paul say this? Or did some other person that we don't know of who came hundreds of years later say it? Who said this? And if they decide that that source is from God or something, then they'll believe what it says no matter what. However, the approach that I take is you don't look at, it doesn't really so much matter who said it. It matters what's being said. Who said it matters to some degree, of course. If it's, some like mass murderer or something, if there's some reason why you want to take who said it into account, you may want to. But for the most part, it's not about who said it. Doesn't matter who said it. Doesn't matter how old it is. It matters what's being said. That's the important part.
Crucifixion. I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it has the crucifixion.
By any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of. So
I got that from ChatGPT, by the way.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
guys, I'm just
I can actually.
smart for a second.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
Yeah, so I'll show you this. So the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant, and then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia.
Full screen, by the way? Are you guys? Is the video
last summer,
okay?
and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that.
Sorry, let me fix that. You're saying it's cropped? How cropped is it? Let me see if I can't. Oh, God, I'm sorry, guys. There, how's that? Sorry about that. There, that should be better. All right, let's continue.
That original, and I produced a facsimile. So I copied,
Oh, he made that. It's cute, though. I like it.
Copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
And so there's categorizing systems, and the standard one is called the Gregory Alland categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. If it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, P46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all 4 Gospels and Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So the only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it. It's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's.
And I believe that that's probably true. I haven't looked into the Gospel of Barnabas in detail, but from the fact that Billy promotes the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, which are very obviously fake, known to be fake, it certainly wouldn't surprise me that would be the case for this document as well.
Referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than.
If you say it's a known forgery and expert, I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit and leading up into the New.
Well, hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name?
Yeah,
I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing, but I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes what happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth.
Okay, so I'm very familiar with the Gospel of Philip. I'm not too familiar with the Gospel of, what was it? Jesus Christ's wife or something like that? I don't know what that is. The Gospel of Philip, I am familiar with. And so the Gospel of Philip is a Gnostic text that, again, yeah, it was probably written in 2nd, 3rd, or 4th century CE, something like that. And the whole emphasis of this is the unification of male and female. They talk again and again and again about the bridal chamber, which is symbolic for combining masculine and feminine forces. And this is also the same gospel that says, when you understand this information, the individual who understands this information is no longer a Christian, they are a Christ. So the Gospel of Philip is continuously emphasizing transcendence through knowledge and understanding, and the importance of unifying masculine and feminine forces. And yeah, in the Gospel of Philip, that's where it says that Jesus kissed Mary on the mouth. Now, to me, I don't look at it as being, I don't believe that literally happened. Maybe it did. I don't know. I don't care, to be honest. But these stories aren't supposed to be taken literally. They are, in some of these stories, it says that the world is like on the back of 2 fish or something like that. And that doesn't mean that they're literally on 2 fish. It has to do with like contending forces. And so kissing Mary on the mouth doesn't mean that actually happened. It meant that it signified the equality and unification of Jesus and Mary. In other words, in like Jungian terms, Mary would be the anima of Jesus Christ, or the internal feminine aspect that is being activated. So yeah, anyway, I want to say this. So when it comes to something like Gospel of Philip, yes, it was a document that was written later, but it has an extremely empowering message. Did the stuff in it actually happen? No. Could have. I doubt it. Could have, though, but I'm not saying it did. But if someone like Billy says, oh, this actually happened, that's when it becomes problematic.
And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text.
By the way, the gospel I'm familiar with is the Gospel of Philip. He's talking about the Gospel of Jesus Christ, Christ's wife. I don't know anything about that one. So, yeah.
Was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' wife, and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' wife. So,
but by the way, the Gospel of Thomas is another fantastic Gnostic gospel. That one's very old. Some historians believe that it's the oldest gospel. Not everyone believes that, but some do. Some date it as far back, very far back. I think the general agreed timeline is somewhere around, I think, 70 CE, which is pretty early for the Gospel of Thomas. Some people even think that the other Gospels were based on the Gospel of Thomas. But the Gospel of Thomas is one of my favorite Gospels because in it is the secret teachings of Jesus. And this Gospel emphasizes again and again and again that we are all divine. When you understand Christ's message, you will become Christ, that the kingdom of heaven is within us and all around us. It's a state of mind and it's a state of being. And it's a fantastic gospel. Anyway, I don't know about this Jesus Christ's wife one, which is apparently copied from that or something. I don't know, but let's see.
So I just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
I mean, I would, from a historical perspective, I would agree with Wes. I mean, I don't know, I haven't checked this out myself, but if I would very much think that what Wes is saying is probably true.
Fair enough. I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit. Predominantly.
All right, we're going to get into the Old Testament. The Old Testament is full of violence, horrible things. So let's see what they have to say about that. Before they do, let me go to the bathroom because this is going to be interesting. So.
From my research, I discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma Elish and the 7 Tablets of Creation is a lot of in Genesis, a lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because obviously Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish and the 7 Tablets of Creation. The Epic of Atrocities as well is also there in the Old Testament.
So I see someone that says, by the way, the Gospel of Thomas was written 800 years after Jesus' death. It's a clear fake. That is not true. Let me look this up. How old is the Gospel of Thomas? The majority of scholars place it somewhere in the middle to last 2nd century. Yet those who conclude the Gospel of Thomas precedes the year 100 AD remain a minority. So if we look at, it says that, so basically between 60 CE to 250 CE, okay? 60, not 800 years. 60 or 250. That's kind of the range. So it's not 800 years later. It's either it's largely agreed upon that it's somewhere between 60 and 250.
Several other tablets as well, Code of Hammurabi and a few others, have made it into that text. Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the Epic of Atrocities. And so we tend to see this this copying of ancient tablets, text, and scriptures, even some papyruses.
So Mr. Wolf says, but that doesn't make it true. You're right. Age has nothing to do with it. What matters is the content. What matters is what's being said. I just point out that I just am correcting what someone said. It's not 800 years later. It's 60 to 250 years later. Doesn't mean it affects its truth content. But when you look at what the Gospel of Thomas, what it has to say, you see that it is infinitely more progressive and liberating than, let's say, many of the Old Testament scriptures. And I would say New Testament as well, though I do like some of the Gospels. I don't have anything. For the most part, I agree with most of what Jesus said. I don't agree with how Christians have interpreted what Jesus said. So I agree with most of the Gospels. I don't believe that Jesus did all those miracles, but when you look at these things symbolically and metaphorically, love thy neighbor as thyself, etc., there's a lot of good stuff in there. I have no problem with Jesus. I think Christ is awesome. I think Christians have interpreted Christ terribly and have committed immeasurable atrocities in his name, and he would be appalled at what has occurred.
Into the biblical text, meaning that my point here is that I think a lot of people are saying that this information was written in real time. A lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe that. But a lot of this information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I have found, that it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never reference that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with.
I know I keep stopping this, but I just want to see, this is why I don't really like debates like this. To me, this is missing the entire point. To argue about, oh, what's older than what, who copied who, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. It matters that a certain book promotes mass unaliving of children, human sacrifice, the oppression of women, the promotion of slavery. I don't care how old your freaking book is. I don't care if you have 1 million documents in the world. I don't care if some being came down from the sky and handed me a book that said that. I'd say this is some bullshit because I can think for myself and come to the conclusion that these are toxic ideas. So anyway, that's why I like, who gives a shit? Who copied who? How old is what? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Nah, who? You just don't kill people. Like, it's very simple. And this is why the world is so screwed up, because people have no ability to think for themselves. They look to some document to tell them what to do, or some god to tell them what to do, or some guru to tell them what to do. You should always think for yourself. Don't listen, like even me, don't listen to what I have to say. Examine what listen to what I have to say, but don't take it without criticism. Like, examine it and see the reason and rationale behind the things that I talk about. Anyway, missing the point here.
With a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
Have you read?
DMW says, I could have sworn that I heard Billy acknowledge that he misspoke. I think he did say like fair enough or something like that, which to his credit, that's good.
The Anomalies?
Yeah, I've done lectures.
Do you mind? Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Anomalies for us?
Sure. The Anomalies is a very ancient text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal. And the summary of it is that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 46 times larger than Earth. Earth didn't exist at the time that this, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there's talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very popular figure in ancient times in the religious books and texts. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the one that during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat and destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away, recoalesced, taking the water, land, and organic material, which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt. Other parts of it were thrown towards the sun, and some were thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system. This planet, or this moonlet that orbited supposedly a brown dwarf, basing on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun.
Who cares? What is it?
And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that Saturn and I believe Neptune switch places. Uranus is flipped on its side, and that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the New Militia also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to utilize us as workers for their workforce.
All right. So now we're getting into like ancient alien theory. So here's the thing about ancient alien theory. Is it possible that in our past, aliens came, manipulated our DNA and made us their slaves, or whatever it is? Is that possible? Sure. I don't believe that happened. I don't believe that happened. But again, it's one of those things of who cares? Some people have this idea. So what we want to do is transform ourselves and transform our world, which means raising our consciousness and help others raise their consciousness as well. Some people seem to have this idea that like believing in aliens has something to do with, aliens have nothing to do with believing in aliens has nothing to do with raising your consciousness. Believing in conspiracy theories has nothing to do with raising your consciousness. Raising your consciousness is about creating a new model of how the world works that reflects its unity, so that you can recognize the unity within us and each other and create a world that reflects unity. It's about going from self-awareness to all awareness. Whether aliens existed or not, or I mean, I believe aliens exist, but whether they like manipulated our DNA or not, doesn't matter. And so personally, I don't believe that happened. I think that it's possible that there could have been some influence in our evolution. And if that were the case, I believe though that would happen at the frequency level, not like a physical interaction, but rather manipulating the underlying frequency aspect of reality in order to somehow influence evolution in some way or another through these very powerful beings that no longer exist in this dimension, but are now interdimensional beings. In the Neogenian system, we call these CFDs. Anyways, if CFDs could have had some sort of influence on our evolution, I believe that that's possible. Do I know that happened? No, I don't know that happened. Did aliens physically land here and do stuff? I highly doubt that. But again, it's neither here nor there. It makes no sense. It makes that. Now, if it's just something that you're interested in, and because we all have hobbies and things that we're interested in and things that we like to look into, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It doesn't have anything to do with reaching a higher state of consciousness. So anyway, let's.
In the Atrocities epic, you see a much similar story, like slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old, the Epic of Atrocities. And we see a very similar story. And we see where the sons of God literally came down to earth. They came from Mars, according to this text, if you read the translation of the planet Mars and to English. And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle in South Africa against Enki and Lil and Anu. And they come to terms without going to battle. They argued that they needed women, human women, believe it or not. And they also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities on Earth, and according to the text on Mars, not according to me. And a decision was made.
I wonder what Wes is thinking about all this, because this is so. Anyway, I don't know where Billy is going with all this.
By Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here, they would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that they're going to kill it, but somehow some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, that's my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor and worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories that you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident and many other crazy stories that are in the Bible. You can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient text, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah tablet to give him instructions on how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat. It was a round disc that he built with there's sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum now. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe there's a creator of the universe. I believe that the mathematics, the quantum physics, all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe.
So I agree with Billy on that there's a divine spark within all of us, and the God of the Bible is not the creator of the universe. Yeah, I agree with Billy on that. Yeah, it's a little unfortunate that Billy doesn't. If he were to speak about things in a different way, I think it would be much more effective, rather than saying, "Oh, these." He just seems to, no matter what he comes across, he just seems to absorb any document, regardless of its legitimacy or where it comes from, as though it historically happened. And that's the big difference, is that these things didn't historically happen. We can't, if he were to present them as, hey, you know what? Thousands of years ago, there were these highly enlightened people, and they were trying to communicate to us about higher levels of reality, and they put their ideas in story format that we can learn from. That would be great. But if you're like, oh, this literally happened, like when we talk about archons. Archons, in terms of Gnosticism, are these evil beings, and the chief archon is known as Yaldabaoth, or the Demiurgos, which is the creator god, or the god of the Bible, who creates a world, Earth, to trap human bodies, to trap divine souls into human bodies, to basically be his slaves. And so when we talk about archons on my channel, I straight up say, like, Yaldabaoth does not literally exist, at least not in the way as described in the Gnostic text. He didn't literally create the world in 7 days like the god of the Bible, whatever. But these archons represent forces, archetypes, energies within ourselves that can prevent us from reaching higher states of consciousness, which are what demons are, essentially. Demons are aspects within us that keep us from actualizing and becoming our true selves, or living the best life possible, or pull us towards destructive behaviors. And now, from a Jungian psychology perspective, we know that it's not about trying to destroy or deny our demons. It's about integrating our darkness, integrating our shadow, and understanding why they behave the way that they do, so that we can find ways to work with that energy and transform it, and then alchemically. Alchemically just meaning not literally like turning metal into gold. Alchemically, it just means you use the term alchemical anytime it has to do with like the mind or spirit and you're transforming it. That's, alchemy is about turning metal into gold, but we can understand it as like turning shadow into light or integrating shadow. It's a metaphorical way to understand. So Billy is kind of like, so we talk about alchemy on my channel, but when we talk about alchemy, I say, hey guys, look, this is not about literally turning metal into gold. This is about attaining higher levels of consciousness that we use metals as metaphors to explore that. Billy is kind of like someone who would say it's literally about turning metal into gold and also about maybe perhaps levels of consciousness, because Billy does seem to have some good ideas, progressive ideas in terms of, like that we're all God and divine sparks. But that's kind of the difference here, right? Like for me, I'd be like, if we're using alchemy as an example, I would say, look, not literally true, but we can understand it as a very powerful symbolic and archetypal system. And Billy would be more like, no, it's literally true. And then that's why he doesn't look very credible. And that's unfortunate. And because someone like Billy can come along and be like, or Wes can come along and clearly show that it's not the case.
I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs.
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a seriologist friend and we walked through it a couple of years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said that there were like verbatim parallels with the biblical creation story. Even just going off of what you said, which I think there are components of that I would agree with, the Battle of the Gods, the concept of Enki and the younger gods, and they fight Tiamat, and then Marduk, who swears he'll defeat Tiamat, and
I know I'm sorry I keep pausing this, but I just want to say another thing. When it comes to this idea of like, oh, there are stories from different religions that seem very similar. And then so people are like, oh, this religion clearly copied that religion. See, because they're similar, they copied each other. It is possible that they copied each other, possible, and probably did in some cases. But I also want to say not in all cases. Just because stories are similar doesn't automatically mean that one copied another. It means that reality is based on a certain pattern, and those who can attain high levels of consciousness can access those patterns and will then put those patterns in story form. So we're all accessing these patterns and putting them in story form. So they're going to be similar because just like, you have the story of Lucifer, you have the story of Prometheus. You have different archetypes from different traditions that reflect each other very, that are very similar. You have this common theme of a god that dies and is resurrected. But these are common themes of destruction, creation, and transformation. You're going to find this in Egypt. You're going to find this in Greece. You're going to find this in Christianity. You're going to find this theme again and again and again, not so much because one copied another, but because these are fundamental patterns in reality. It would be kind of like saying, I don't know, that Lord of the Rings copied Star Wars because, Gandalf is like Obi-Wan and Frodo is like Luke Skywalker and Sauron is like Darth Vader. It's that they're tapping into fundamental themes of the struggle between good and evil, or light and dark, which has been misinterpreted. It should be about integrating, not so much of a fight. But still, nonetheless, these are these patterns that are being tapped into, and you find these patterns everywhere. For example, if you look at tarot cards are rich in archetypal imagery. So guess what? You'll find the Hermit, which the Hermit is like the wise old man who's like Obi-Wan, who's like Gandalf. These are very common themes that are reflected throughout, and so it's not so much about copying as it is tapping into the same underlying framework. That's not to say that copying doesn't occur. I think that it does, but not all the time. I think sometimes people go overboard with trying to say certain religions copy each other.
Kwenku, who kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow, and there's this big battle, and then the gods that die end up being the earth and the sky and even us, because we are the end result of that battle. I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text.
Okay, that I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're making this the argument, because if you brought it up, and I mean this with all due respect, now
I will say some people in the chat are saying that Billy didn't expect this to be a debate, that it wasn't framed that way. I don't know if that's true. If that's the case, that does kind of suck for them to do this, because, you know, if you're going to do a debate, first of all, you want to know that you're agreeing to a debate, and also that you're prepared and everything. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know how they wouldn't have known that it would be. I mean, if you're going to talk to someone who is a Christian theologian who clearly has different views than you would think that that would be understood. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not sure there.
There are superficial parallels, I would agree, you know, the separation of the water, the concept of the earth being formless and void, that's also in the Enuma Elish. However, I think all the other details, you know, it's the details that make the difference. And if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, you don't have a creation within 7 days.
I'm not going to take the Enuma Elish and put it into the biblical text. There are certain words that they utilize that let me know that they copied it from that text. Like, for example,
so what words?
Separating the water from the waters, the void, the earth being void. That information is literally just copied over. So it tells you that somebody saw that and said, let me add it to this book right here. Or let me add it to the scripture or this papyrus, because it wasn't a book yet at that time.
Was this text discovered that makes it parallel to Genesis? Was this like supposedly discovered prior to? I'm just curious.
It wasn't discovered prior to the Bible, but it dates back long before the Bible was ever written.
Yeah. So let me just say this. So the reason why I say it's actually an apologetic against that is because the purpose of the Enuma Elish, which the Babylonians read every Babylonian New Year, was to point out the fact that the deities, and there's countless deities in the Babylonian pantheon, they actually come from the created order. So they're not outside of time and space. They actually come from the created order. And when they die in this battle, right, when Tiamat is defeated, the defeated gods become the earth and the sky and the plants and even you and me. And in that sense, the theme is that you don't actually have any purpose or end result. And you're not created in the image of God. In fact, in the ancient Babylonian system, only the kings were created in the image of God. And what we see that is counter to that is that even, sure, there's superficial, you know, divided the waters, but we find that in almost every, you know, society and culture. That's not a parallel as much as it's just a generality. I would say what we see within the biblical account is that God purposefully creates. There's only one God. He purposefully creates, and then he creates, and it's good. And it continues to say it's good 7 times. And then at the end of chapter 1, just for, you know, the thick people in the original audience, it says, and then it was very good. And then he creates humanity, not kings, but simply the humans that he creates in God's image. And they have purpose and meaning, and that instills them with this creation order. And that's not what we find in the Enuma Elish. In fact, we find the opposite in the Enuma Elish, is that the created order is...
One thing that I want to say real quick, which I think is really cool. So according to the Gnostics, you know how he's saying there's only one God, etc. According to the Gnostics, when the God of the Bible said that he was the only God and that there was no God apart from him, according to the Gnostics, he was the first sinner. In doing that, he became the first sinner. And it says specifically, it says in saying that he sinned against the entirety, the all. Because why? Because trying to set yourself up as the only God when we are all divine, that was the fundamental sin, according to Gnostics.
Not good. It's a mistake. And that you are not created in the image of God. And there's a reminder that regular people are not created in the image of God. So linguistically, I mean, Hebrew does have Semitic ties with Akkadian. It doesn't with Sumerian. Sumerian is a language isolate, agglutinizing language. But I would say, just with all due respect, the parallels linguistically are not there. There might be superficial kind of concepts that are there, but they're so superficial that we can find them in everything. In the sense of, I'm in my office studio, you're in your office studio. That doesn't mean that, you know, that we're the same people or we're even in the same place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I just see if I have all these texts out, there's a lot of different information that you can see. There's a lot of it's been copied word for word into the biblical text.
But what's the word for word?
In your version of what you believe in, you keep saying that God's a he.
Yep.
And so where do you get that from?
Well, throughout both the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, you have the masculine singular pronoun used for God.
And why is God a man? Where's the evidence of this?
Well, God isn't a man. See, within historical Christianity, we don't believe that God has a gender. However, the way that he has decided to reveal himself is through the masculine plural, and then ultimately by becoming a human in the person of Jesus Christ. So we don't believe that God has a gender. In fact, the fact that God creates humanity in his image and he creates them male and female, those are two aspects of the image of God. And so that's the completeness. So historical Christianity has never argued that God is gendered. Jesus is gendered in the sense that during the incarnation, he becomes a human man, but he's still fully man and fully God. But God is spirit. And right, as the scripture says, we worship him in spirit and in truth. But nobody's arguing that. What's that? Sorry?
That always blows my mind.
God is the same all the time, right? He's always good. God is all the same all the time.
All right, so let me address this. So, you know, I'm an ex-Christian, so I grew up in a Christian household, was Christian for a very long time. So this idea of, is God male? What Wes is saying is that God chooses to express himself through a masculine plural and then a masculine singular, but that Christians don't actually believe that God has a gender, that God is spirit, which has no gender. All right, so there's a lot to unpack here, so let me unpack it bit by bit. First of all, this idea that Christians don't believe that God has a gender, that God is genderless, that's kind of true. Well, okay, so first of all, I have to predicate this by saying I'm coming from the kind of Christianity that I was taught. So very fundamentalist Christianity. We believed the Bible was literally true. God created the earth in 7 days. The earth is only 6,000 years old. And that, you know, every part of the Bible is divinely inspired, etc. We literalist, fundamentalist Christianity. So when it came to the gender of God, yeah, if you were to really press someone, yeah, you would ultimately say, oh, well, spirit doesn't have a gender. But the mindset that you have as a Christian is very much that God is male and that maleness is superior, or should be ruling. Because in the Bible, it says that men are above women. And so Wes is right that if you really pressed a Christian, the gender, because they usually say that angels are genderless as well, and that God is genderless. But it's almost like Christianity has this weird doublethink where you can have two conflicting ideas in your head at the same time. And it can create a lot of cognitive dissonance. So yeah, that is like technically true, but most Christians, the kind of Christianity that I grew up in, still act and perceive God as though he were masculine, and that the masculine gender is superior, or if not superior, the ruler, and that women must submit to men. And I mean, you see this story in the story of Adam and Eve and all that. So that's what I would say there. Also, him saying that God expresses himself in the original Hebrew as a masculine plural and then a masculine singular. So the word I think that he's referring to is Elohim. Elohim is plural. So first of all, that's a very strange thing to do, right? You're talking, God is saying, oh, let us make man and woman in our image, using a plural. First, that should be weird. That's saying multiple gods. Elohim is multiple. And Christians usually try and get around this by saying, oh, well, it's the Trinity. God was there and Jesus was there and the Holy Spirit was there. So that's what he meant when he said, let us create man in our image. But that's a real stretch. Also, another thing that I want to point out is that Elohim, him is plural and is used on the word Eloah. So you take the word Eloah and end it with him, Elohim, and you get God's plural. However, Eloah can be taken as feminine. So what some argue is that Eloah is feminine and him is plural. So the combination of Elohim means gods that are male and female. Now, to be fair, this is something that's debated, whether Eloah really is feminine or not. I've seen people say that, no, that's not true. And then I've seen a lot of people who say, well, yes, actually it is. Now, in the Western esoteric tradition, that's absolutely how they interpret it. But they tend to interpret things based on symbolic meaning and metaphor rather than like historical accuracy. So I just want to point that out. I would say that's debatable, whether Eloah is literally supposed to be male or female. But so, for example, like when I approach these stories, because remember, I approach these stories as how we can use them to help us access higher levels of consciousness and understand ourselves and our lives better. So when I see Elohim, I interpret it as Eloah, female, him, male, the gods and the goddesses. That's how I interpret it. But is that historically accurate? Is Eloah literally feminine? That's up for debate. So I'm just trying to get across, there's a difference between historically what certain things are, and then because these are just stories, and it's about how we use these stories to better understand ourselves. But anyway, regardless, Elohim is plural. That is plural for sure. Him is plural masculine. Eloah may be plural, maybe singular feminine. But it's regardless, it's when you say Elohim said, let us make man and woman in our image. Yeah, it's saying that let us make let's make them in the image of us, male and female. Now, I think Wes, to Wes's credit, I think he's saying that that's true. Not that there's multiple gods. I think Wes is saying that God isn't male or female. God is genderless, which I agree with. However, I don't think that that's very fair to be like, oh no, Christians don't consider God to be masculine. Again, like I said, if you really press them, yeah, they'll probably say God is genderless, but that's not how one acts. That's not the mindset one has when you are a Christian and you are in church and you're praying to God, etc. To make things even more complex, gender is just a very complicated thing when it comes to, so like let's take Kabbalah, for example. In Kabbalah, you have Chokhmah, which means wisdom. But what is it that's in Hebrew? Chokhmah in Hebrew? Wisdom is Chokhmah in Hebrew. But what is it in Greek? It's Sophia. So Chokhmah is wisdom in Hebrew. Sophia is wisdom in Greek. And the interesting thing is that in Kabbalah, Chokhmah is considered the father. Chokhmah is considered the father. However, when we look at many of the stories in the Bible, Chokhmah, the wisdom of God, is described as feminine. So we see Chokhmah described as feminine in the Bible, but then in something like Kabbalah, we see Chokhmah described as the great father, the father of all. So how does that make sense? Well, you have to understand these systems are very complex. So, for example, in Kabbalah, the different energy centers, Sephiroth, take on different genders depending on the perspective and what they're doing. So, Chokhmah, or wisdom, from the perspective of God, is female because it's receiving its power from God. However, from our perspective, we are receiving the power from wisdom. So from our perspective, Chokhmah is masculine, the father. So in Kabbalah, they think of it in terms of giving and receiving. That which receives is considered feminine. That which gives is considered masculine. But each one of those centers, those Sephiroth, each one of the Sephiroth, both give and receive. So from different perspectives can be considered male or female. This is really common in Gnosticism as well, when you have Barbelo, who's the great mother, the mother and womb of the universe, but she's also called the mother father and the father and the thrice male. So you have gender is very complex. And honestly, trying to think of these things in terms of gender is just really confusing. You should really just think of them as energies that are doing particular functions. Now, it's helpful in stories, if you want to tell a story about it and you want to make a certain entity a god or a goddess or an androgynous being, that's when it's useful. But if you're trying to understand it in a very clear way, thinking of it in terms of gender is very confusing. Anyway, long story short, complicated subject. He is correct. If you really pressed a Christian, they would say God is genderless. However, that's not in practice how it manifests itself.
Right?
Yeah, but we do see that though in Scripture, God has revealed himself through the masculine plural. And there are aspects of God's character that we see within Scripture that do actually communicate. Jesus says that he longs to gather Israel like a mother hen collects her chicks. So we see aspects of, the feminine of God, not meaning that God is feminine, but that the image of God reflects both the masculine and the feminine. And that's why
See, I agree with Wes with this, that the image of God reflects both masculine and feminine. It's just, Wes is trying to say, I don't know not the church I went to. That wasn't the way it was perceived.
when, the two become one flesh, there's a uniting of that reflects the image of God as well within the covenant of marriage.
So the two becoming one flesh. Oh my God. Okay. So I know I keep talking a lot. So very quickly, in Gnosticism, the bridal chamber, the union of the masculine and feminine is about uniting with the inner masculine within oneself. It's not about like two literal people. It's about women discovering the inner masculine and integrating it, and men discovering the inner feminine and integrating it. Today, we don't even have to think of it in terms of a gender binary. That's why in the Neo-Genian system, we use mirror self, because it's just your inner reflection. You don't even have to think about it in terms of gender. But in Christianity, this two becoming one flesh, it doesn't have this like transcendent ideal that Wes is trying to portray it as. It's just thought of as like, because yeah, we would talk about that a lot in church, like, oh, the two becoming one. But it wasn't this like high spiritual idea. It was, I don't know. It's very hard to describe unless you're in that mindset. It's almost like not like a property thing, but it's definitely not this super high spiritual ideal that you would typically think of in terms of how we understand things in higher consciousness and integrating our inner aspects. It's a very lower level idea that's not really like how Wes is portrayed. Long story short, I agree with a lot of what Wes is saying right now. However, that's, in my experience, being ex-Christian, that's not how typically Christians interpret that or understand these things.
You actually believe that the majority of Christians really believe that God is not masculine, that God is has both aspects?
I mean, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe.
How many would
Yeah.
tell you?
So yeah, I'm interesting. So I think Carson is pointing that out, and then he's saying it's irrelevant how many Christians believe it. Depends what you're trying to argue. Depends what you're trying to argue.
You know, that God's not a man. They've never been taught this.
Yeah, Billy's right. They really haven't been taught this. So
Well, I was taught it growing up. I was taught it in when I was a child, when I went to seminary, when I went to Bible college. I was taught it in graduate school.
so I would imagine that, yeah, if you're going to Bible college, maybe you'll get to something like that. Again, it's a really hard thing to, because I kind of was taught that, but Christianity is such a weird mindset and religion to be in, is that because you can hold very conflict, like the Bible is all about peace and love. Meanwhile, there's murder and genocide and blah. So it's a weird system of having very conflicting ideas. So you are kind of sort of taught it, but that's not the way you end up perceiving it and experiencing things. This is why you have, the whole idea of Adam is superior to Eve. Eve is supposed to be Adam's helper, who is subservient to Adam. And then in the New Testament, you have women must remain silent. Women cannot teach. The husband is above the woman. So you see, it doesn't really end up result. That's why I look at the psychological effects of these things.
I would say I would say a few things to that. I would say, in one sense, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe, because what historical biblical Christianity articulates is what they should believe. There are Christians who run around saying all sorts of things that are not in
I would agree with that. I that's fine with me.
conformity to biblical, historical, Orthodox Christianity. And they shouldn't believe that because it's irrelevant. And so if one Christian believes something,
I just want to see what he said there one more time about Orthodox Christianity.
sorts of things that are not in conformity to biblical, historical, Orthodox Christianity. And they shouldn't believe that because it's irrelevant. And so if one Christian believes something that is not in line with biblical Christianity, I mean, that's on them. So God is not gendered, but he does express through inspired scripture the masculine the masculine pronoun.
That's pretty convenient. I mean, for an all-knowing, all-loving God to understand that human beings are going to take that and abuse it to put their boot on the neck of women
That's a good point Billy has. I agree with that.
For eons. It's pretty interesting. Also,
Agreed.
I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, so hold on. Let me speak to that, because it is interesting
real
that.
Quick, guys, I have to.
Yeah, sure.
If it was only for the Old Testament, I would have a hard time.
All right, we're going to skip what this guy says. I have to go to the bathroom again, though. Hold on. All right, let's get back to this. Let's skip what this guy. Oh, let me turn the AC on. All right, let's skip what this guy's saying.
That put accused of however the Bible, or if they're accused of having an affair, he started like he God that's what found that like do like this is their man job like would make they in this his husband finding that talk shit saying like we're supposed to be here to eat each other. I get when I'm these horrible things. I would call myself wife continued and was like true and committed.
You hearing what I'm just hearing? Eating each other? Zombies? What am I hearing this right? What is I wonder what he's talking about.
It's huge. They don't believe, you know, talks to this guy and then that's
to them.
Okay.
It's through a lot written.
Anyway, go ahead. I had to just throw in.
Yeah. I mean, there's a really great resource written by a friend of mine, John Dixon. It's a book called Bullies and Saints, where he goes through a lot of the instances of we're obviously going to find abuses, and every human being is going to find a way to exploit whatever is presented to them. So in one sense, I think we can say, you know, isn't it convenient that God used the masculine plural pronoun, or sorry, the masculine pronoun, I keep saying plural, it's just a mistake, the masculine pronoun. And we can say, oh, sure, that's convenient, maybe, but it is how he has revealed himself to us. And it's not his fault if we abuse that. I mean,
well, no, Billy is right. Billy, I agree with Billy on this point. Billy is saying, if God is all knowing, he would know how people would interpret him using the masculine pronoun and use it to promote superiority over women. So Billy is saying, essentially, if God is all knowing, why didn't he fix this by perhaps, you know, using both or a neutral term or something like that? And Wes is saying, oh, well, it's not God's fault that people abused it. If God is all knowing, then he should make it crystal clear. And that's one of the major problems that I had when I started to leave Christianity, is that there are so many ambiguous things in the Bible and so many confusing and contradictory things in the Bible that if it was written and inspired by a all-perfect being, he would have been able to do it in such a way that it was crystal clear. Or he could literally write it on the moon right now. He could write, hey, guys, the Bible is real. I'm not a man, by the way. He could, you know, like literally but he doesn't. And anyway, I agree with Billy on this point and not with Wes on this particular point.
I mean, we could say, so I grew up in the Middle East. My parents worked in Amman, Jordan. And when I was living in the Middle East, there was a country called the Democratic Republic of Iraq. Now, just because democracy exists and people are going to name things democratic when they obviously aren't, doesn't mean we then judge democracy. I mean, think of the Democratic Republic of North Korea, right? Nobody thinks that that's an actual representation of democracy. So people are always going to abuse terms and ideas and concepts. The difference is, though, I think historically within Judeo-Christianity, you have this ethic that we were talking about before that I think is fundamentally different.
Wes needs to answer why God decided to express himself as masculine. And he's not answering that.
Than what we find in things like the Enuma Elish, the Atrocities, and other things, in that we are created in the image of God. And actually, one of the earliest criticisms of Christianity are by individuals like Celsus, who is a Greco-Roman philosopher in the 2nd century, where he accused Christianity of being foolish, dishonorable, and stupid, and he called it the religion of slaves, women, and children. Why? Not because God used the masculine pronoun for himself and people were abusing that, because the concept that Christians believed in of everybody, no matter what your gender, your race, your social standing, you know, Paul says in Christ there is no slave nor free, there is no Jew nor Gentile, there is no Scythian or barbarian, there's no male nor female. You know, these things united people. And we can see there's a historian named Rodney Stark. And in his book, The Rise of Christianity, he actually says that you can track empirically the agency of women across the ancient world by the movement of Christianity. So that, in other words, whenever an area became populated by Christians, we see a direct correlation with the privileges and treatments of women that expand in time when the surrounding culture largely didn't view women as being fully human. So I think we're always going to have abuses, but if there's one worldview that...
All right, let's stop there. So let's remember that the Bible is supposed to be divinely inspired by God, the perfect inerrant word of God. I'm not sure if Wes believes that, but that's what a lot of Christians believe. That's what the type of Christian that I grew up is. That's what we were taught. That's what I was taught. And because I have heard him say the word inspired a couple times, I'm apt to think that perhaps that's what he believes. But anyway, remember, the Bible's supposed to be inspired by God. Now, he just pointed out, Wes said, oh, Paul says there's no slave, there's no free, there's no this, there's no that, trying to talk about equality. Then he's saying, oh, Christianity actually empowers women. Well, okay, so let me just point to you a couple of verses here. So first of all, with regard to slavery, he just said, in the Bible it says Paul said there is no slave or free, etc. Well, here's Ephesians 6:5 that says, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Colossians 3:22. And then in 1 Timothy 6:1-2, all who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters fully worthy of respect, so that God's name in our teaching may not be slandered. Those who have believing masters should not show them disrespect just because they are fellow believers. Instead, they should serve them even better because their masters are dear to them as fellow believers and are devoted to the welfare of their slaves. And then in Exodus, anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. In other words, you're allowed to beat your slave because they're your property as long as you don't kill them. As long as they recover after a day or two. So remember, it would be completely different if you're like, oh, this is just an old book. And yeah, people treated each other really poorly in the past. And so that's what happened back then. And that book just demonstrates that that's what happened. That sucks. And we're above that. And we've, as a collective humanity have realized that that's wrong. But that's not what Christianity says. For those who believe that the Bible is divinely inspired, everything in the Bible is supposed to be perfectly divinely inspired by God. And the Bible was actually used to try and legitimize slavery. I think they even had something called like the Slave's Bible or something. It's really gross. It's really sick. And so again, if you're looking at it as just like a book that like, hey, there's some stuff we can learn from in this book and some stuff that's really bad and we should disregard, that's fine. It's when you're trying to say that this book was created by a perfect, all-loving God, it clearly isn't. Oh, and real also on his it's so great for women, right? How about this? 1 Corinthians 14:34. And this is New Testament, by the way. I don't want people always go, oh, that's Old Testament. First of all, it doesn't matter. Second of all, this isn't Old Testament. This is New Testament. Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. 1 Timothy 2:11, a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. Ephesians 5:22, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. So Wes is full of it. Doesn't matter if maybe the Bible did help empower women at certain times in history. That's possible. However, if you're trying to say the Bible is a perfect, inerrant, or even just divinely inspired, if you don't straight up condemn that, then there's an issue. If you don't straight up say that's wrong, there's an issue. And it's very it's very insincere to present it as though that's not in there, because it clearly is. And it's, disgusting and is extremely harmful. There's so many. I mean, I could read so many other horrible things as well, but let's continue and see what else this has to say. So far, I'm agreeing more with what the conclusions that Billy is coming to, but his research is really bad. Wes is very well researched, but his conclusions are terrible.
Exists that gives agency to people and says that everybody has worth by nature of being just human.
No, excuse me. Christianity does not teach that everyone has worth just by the nature of being human. Christianity teaches the concept of original sin, that you are born a sinner and worthy of hell. You are taught that you are born a sinner and worthy of hell unless you repent to Jesus so that you can be saved and washed clean by the blood of Jesus. Creepy as well, by the way. And so that's bullshit. What Wes is saying right there, total bullshit. You are not taught that you're this. No, you're taught that you're a worthless, dirty, rotten sinner and that you're nothing without Jesus.
It's the Christian worldview. And that's where I think it's very different. So we can argue about why we think God should or shouldn't have revealed himself in his pronouns. But I think that's actually irrespective of.
How about why God decided that slavery should be in the Bible? How about why God decided genocide should be in the Bible? How about why God decided SA should be in the Bible? How about let's move past the pronoun thing and why would a perfect, all-knowing, omniscient, omnibenevolent God include all those things? By the way, I just want to make something clear. Those verses that I was reading that's very negative towards women and supporting slavery, Jesus didn't say any of that. I just want to make that clear. Jesus didn't say any of that. Those were people who came later who added those books. Those are not part of the Gospels. They are part of the New Testament and have to do with like apostles and different followers and those who ended up forming churches. So I just want to make that clear because for the most part, I like a lot of what Jesus said. There's not much that Jesus said that I disagree with. I agree with quite a lot that Jesus says, not everything, but quite a lot. And so I just want to make it clear, Jesus didn't say any of that. But regardless, it's still in the Bible and considered divinely inspired by God.
The historical reality that we see within the impact of Christianity, particularly on the West, but around the world, and how it gives agency to the marginalized.
Wes, can I ask you one? So when you, because I'm always interested in like his mother says, I non-follow of he journey that it shot him, but what's love up eight that is you did like review function
usual. And
am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a bit of an unusual household in that my mom grew up in India and my parents when I was younger. I was born in Pakistan and I spent a portion of my childhood in Jordan. I grew up in majority Muslim countries and surrounded by majority Muslim environments. And we had, a copy of the Quran in the room. In fact, we had the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon and, for a little while, other.
So he sounds like he grew up in a more progressive household. We would not. In my household, we would not have had any of those books. They would have been considered inspired by Satan, the devil's books. Just real quick, for those who might not be familiar with some of the atrocities in the Bible, I just want to point some of these out because it's really important to understand just how bad the Bible is. So I'll just go over some of these really quickly. All right, where God has every firstborn in Egypt killed. In Exodus, it says every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well, literally killing innocent children, even animals, for no. And God accepts a burnt virgin sacrifice. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord: if you give me the Ammonites, whatever comes out the door to greet me, I will sacrifice as a burnt offering. When Jephthah returned home, his daughter came out to greet him, and she was an only child, and he did to her what he had vowed to do. Commands of genocide. In 1 Samuel, This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up to Egypt. Go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men, women, children, infants, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys. There's so much more. They also have verses where they basically say, if you go conquer a city, kill all the men, but you can take the women for yourself. God says this. It's disgusting. And these are the books that they want in schools. They're like, oh, let's ban all these books, which most of them are perfectly fine. But let's put the Bible in there, which has sexual assault and genocide and slavery. And it's sick. It's disgusting. And that's why this upsets me. When you're trying to pretend, oh, it's such a good book, so empowering. It's divinely inspired by God. When literally it's like, go kill everyone and take the women for yourselves. The fuck? Forget about, oh, why did God express himself as male? Why did God express himself as in SA promoting SA? And anyway, let's continue. I'm not a big fan of Christianity. If you didn't know that.
Documents in our house. These were things that my parents, although they never verbally.
Wayne Simpson says again, taking things out of context. Do you mean I'm taking things out of context, or do you mean because I am not taking anything out of context? What context do you need where that is permissible? What context do you need that the killing of innocent children is commanded? The raping of women is allowed. What context do you need for that? I'm curious. Anyway, I don't know if you were saying that to me or not. If you weren't saying that to me, sorry. But if you were, no, you don't. No context will justify such a thing.
He said, these Christianity is true. Therefore, these are not forbidden. These are not verboten. The truth, capital T truth, of the reality of the world we behold can stand up against scrutiny and investigation. And I did do a great deal of that as a kid. My dad is a historian as well. He has a doctorate, and I grew up on him, reading the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. But at the exact same time, the reason why I actually went to university with full intention of going into the police force, but it was interactions with Muslims and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and atheists and accusations against the credibility.
Wayne says the anger is evident in you, bro. I'm angry. Something like that should make you angry. If it doesn't make you angry, there's a problem. If you don't hate acts like that, there's a problem. If you accept acts like that, there's a problem. If you embrace acts like that, there's a problem. So yeah, I'm angry and I reject that completely, totally, 100%. And I condemn it. That's what should happen. That's what you should do with atrocity and genocide and assault and all of these disgusting things.
Believe the Bible, which actually piqued my interest, because they would say things that I said that I thought, if that's true, of course that undermines what I believe. I believe that Jesus is God incarnate. If I can't trust the Gospels as reliable first century eyewitness testimony.
See, I get pissed. So because he started talking about like oppression of women, that makes me so mad. This is why we need that resurgence of the Lilithian archetype. That's why I love the Lilith archetype so much, and why we who cares what book she got? No, we need that divine power of feminine retribution.
Then I might as well throw all of this away, because I'm not going to believe a lie, even if it's a convenient lie. And so it was actually the exploration of eventually going into graduate college and then now in working on my PhD, the largest secular university in Canada, that got me thinking, okay, how do we investigate these things? What are the methodologies by which we go about to explore the origins and credibility of something like the Bible? And that investigation, with all due respect to Billy and the content that you put out, has actually confirmed what I believe. I'm dealing with the actual manuscripts. I travel to academic institutions, to other countries, and I look at these things and I read them. And it's a privilege to be able to learn languages like Greek and Coptic and Hebrew and Aramaic and dig into these.
This guy, he brags a lot, doesn't he?
Things. And I think ultimately, I really appreciate what you said there, Mark, with your articulation of your personal relationship. And I think that's so important. But I think it's also important to remember that that relationship is based on something that's real and verifiable. And we can look into the evidence. I have friends who are I have friends who are linguists, philologists, and historians. And when we look into these things and we talk with one another and we're discussing, we're constantly trying to falsify our theories, because that's what good history does. We're looking for the falsification. You don't go in, ideally, if you want to be a good historian, with trying to prove your original thesis. You go in and say, okay, what are the avenues that actually could disprove this? And then how do we engage with those in an appropriate and articulate manner? So what I believe is true, but I believe it based on the evidence of the actual documentation. You know, I've read a lot of the literature that you're talking about, Billy, the Numa Elish, the Atrocities, the Bhagavad Gita, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I've read some of them in their original languages because I've tried to be a good historian and go back into the primary sources. Or if I can't, engage with people like my friends who are Assyriologists, who are philologists, and try to not just go off of.
This is such bullshit to me. So yeah, he's going on and on. Let's just say that I don't care how much verification of biblical documents you have. If those documents are pro all those horrible things that I just listed, then it doesn't effing matter how verifiable the documents are. What does it matter when this being, when you look at it logically, is promoting evil? That's exactly what the Gnostics said. The Gnostics said, anyone who looks at this God and doesn't realize that it's an evil being is blind. That's what they said. You have to be blind to not realize that this is an evil being when you look at all the horrible things that it does. That's why the Gnostics were great. The Gnostics were very pro-Jesus, by the way. They were just anti-God of the Old Testament. They thought that Jesus came from a higher God of light and was here to help us escape from the evil creator God of the world. I don't believe that that's literally true. I believe that it's highly symbolic and metaphorical for reaching higher states of consciousness to overcome the dark forces of ignorance and oppression in our world.
Of a translation, but the original. And I think I've found largely the opposite of the conclusions that you have made, Billy. And I know that you are very passionate about what you talk about, and I respect that. I just think that the confidence might not actually be backed up by the reality of the evidence. So when we're looking at something like the Sinai Bible, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Barnabas,
and
when we're looking at something like the Gospel
Billy
of Jesus'
shouldn't
wife,
present
these are things
the
that
things
actually
he does
have
as though they actually
provenance
happened,
that we can verify. And ultimately, I think the answers to the questions of the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of those things point to not just a different conclusion, but actually the opposite conclusion, and that Christianity is true.
Well, now I'm glad you said that. So those three topics are a very small piece of my concept and idea of what really happened in the ancient past. So that's a very small fraction. And that's less than 0.1%. You talk about eyewitness accounts convinced you that Christianity is real. There's been eyewitness accounts of every culture that I've visited around this entire planet, and their eyewitness accounts of what they experienced is 100,000% opposite of what's in the Bible. People have
based on what do you mean? Can you give me an example?
You know, the Dogon tribe, for example, in Mali, Africa, they experienced a culture that they claim came to this planet from Sirius B. They have the evidence that they knew these beings were from Sirius B because they have the instruments that show the orbit of a trinary star system that we couldn't discover until the 1970s with our modern technology, okay? They understood not only the orbital pattern of Sirius A, B, and C, but even that B was...
See, I don't know anything about what Billy is talking about, but I would be highly suspect of what Billy's talking about just because everything that I do know what Billy talks about is not historically accurate. So they can be metaphorically helpful.
Was a failed star, which you can't see it from Earth with the naked eye. They knew that it was a white dwarf. They even knew that they said that if you took a tablespoon of it, the entire tribe or 1,000 men couldn't lift the tablespoon. They understood mass and gravity as well. They were told the shape, the sizes, and the colors of all the planets in our solar system, which they recorded. And there's only one wisdom keeper, and that person can never be touched by a person, If they get touched by another person, they'd actually be killed. And then they eventually have a mentee that they break down that verbally handed down knowledge to. And that next person then takes over, becomes the wisdom keeper. And they've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And science, modern science, has found all their information to be 1,000% accurate. Then you have the Hopi tribe of the Americas, indigenous tribes, Hopi tribe, Lakota tribe, also having engagements with these quote unquote star brothers, even having an account of them being taken underground, which you don't see just only in America. I just came back from Turkey. You have the people from Turkey in Mesopotamia also being taken underground into a place called Derinkuyu by these beings, by these people, a structure that's built 12 stories deep underground, that's made out of volcanic tuff, a very soft stone. And if you don't know what you're doing, it'll actually collapse. There's no evidence of any collapse. And it was thousands of years old. It was reused many times. So the mainstream story about what it was used for to hide from Romans is actually false. This place is ancient. And in order to build it, you actually have to have foreknowledge of how to construct this type of an underground civilization that can hold 20 to 30,000 people, places for livestock, places for worship, with no sign of collapse. And you have to have hundreds of ventilation shafts.
Mr. Wolf says, Morgue, how can you like Jesus but not think that he is God? I do think Jesus is God. And I think I am God. And I think you are God. And I think we're all God. And I believe that Jesus was an enlightened individual that wanted us to understand that. Maybe he didn't exist. I don't know. Doesn't matter though.
Shafts, and I've been down there. Those ventilation shafts cut through solid rock all the way down to the core. And there's even more. It links to other underground cities that are miles and miles away. As you get to the very base of this area, you can cut through and go to another location. But again, these people were taken under. Also, then you have the ancient Egyptians. Similar story. Major catastrophe comes. These people come and take them underground. Then you have the information in the Egyptian book of Going Forth by Day. More accounts by people, our ancestors, that have accounts that do not match up with the biblical text. And so all of a sudden we're saying that all these cultures, the Aboriginal people, I can go into them as well. I've gone to walkabouts in Outback, in the Outback.
Yeah.
And the Aboriginal elders, same thing. They were seated here by Pleiadians. This is their verbal handed down history for thousands of years. And I can go around the world and I can come up with all this information from all these eyewitness accounts from people that should be respected, dignified, and shouldn't be scoffed. And that we're now saying that all this information that they put forward, all their verbal handed down history, all their written history, that's got to go to the side, because this one text is 1,000% accurate.
Sure, but so my question is, most of that is oral history, correct?
Oh, it's all oral history, even the Bible.
Okay, so when we're engaging with oral history, what methodologies are you using to confirm that the orality is?
Well, first and foremost, some of these texts some of these cultures have written down information in caves. You've got cave paintings. The Dogon tribe actually have not only written down.
Sure. No, I don't disagree with that. The question is one of historic. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. The question is one of methodological analysis. So you have to have a method by which you can find either that something is falsifiable or that there are avenues by which you can show internal and external accuracy of credibility. So this is what we do with documents. This is what we do with the ancient gospels. This is what I do. I've worked on Xenophon and Plutarch, and we look at the internal evidences and the external multivalent corroboration to try to figure out, okay, yes, we have all these stories. Great. I don't deny that. But as a historian, as someone who's trying to figure out what is accurate, how do you know if I use the term verisimilitude, do you know what that term means?
No, but I can tell you this. Tell me how the Dogon tribe saw Sirius B, knew the orbit of Sirius B.
That was kind of mean. What, did he really just... That was kind of a dick thing to say.
Binary star system accurately.
Oh, man.
Can show you the orbit with a special tool that they made.
Did I hear that right? Did he just say... Oh, man.
But it was given to him by these people. How do they know the shapes, the sizes, the colors, and the orbital pattern of all these planets in our solar system and other star alignments that they would use to have something called the Ziggy and planet and their own harvesting and planting and so forth and so on? That's not enough evidence that there's something.
Well, Yeah, I'm not aware of that particular case. And even, I mean, I would grant that, the ancient people are far more technological advanced than we give themselves credit for. Just because they're ancient doesn't mean they're stupid. I am well aware, as someone who has done both investigation of the past and done archaeological analysis, that is a reality. My question is simply, okay, you have these stories or you have these accounts, you're referring to them as eyewitness testimony. How are you going about verifying that as that?
Well, if the people had eyewitness testimony about Jesus, they then just wrote down their eyewitness testimony on a piece of paper or parchment paper or papyrus. So these
Right.
people,
So that's where
some of
internal
it's,
methodological
some
analysis.
of it's actually written down. So I mean, it's the same exact thing. There's really no difference.
Well, no. So you do internal investigations to figure out when something was dated. So something.
I mean, Wes is right. You have methods of verification, corroboration, but yeah, I mean, I guess if you're trying, see, I don't take a historical perspective of this stuff because I look at it and go, it's bullshit. It doesn't matter, how many documents you have. I'm not going to believe in a book that promotes genocide and essay, and I don't. I know how to put 2 and 2 together. I know that 2 + 2 = 4. If you get me you get a book that says 2 + 2 = 8, and you say, oh, it's corroborated by 1 million people, I still know that it's bullshit. It's very simple.
Thing like so when I used that term verisimilitude before, that's something we as historians are looking for. It's a term that simply means the appearance or likelihood of truthfulness. So when you do historical analysis,
He's kind of a dick, isn't he?
it's an inference to the best explanation. So you have proof and you have data, and you're extrapolating that data on levels of probability. So some things can be confirmed as high probabilistically true, and other things are lower in their probability that they happened. But there are different methodologies.
Wow, he's really condescending. Like, I mean, to be fair, Billy doesn't do very great research, but treat people with respect, like, I don't know.
Different ways that you explore historically how that happens.
Well,
So for the Gospels, you look at
with the Dogon tribe. Scientists went there to visit the tribe, and they still have no answers because they used their modern science. They took the best scholars to visit these people, and they're still scratching their heads. Something happened there.
sure. And I'm not even denying that necessarily, but the question is, okay, we need different levels of evidence and exploration, not just scientifically, but historically, to derive something as eyewitness testimony. Now we have mountains of that, and I'm more than willing to go into some of that with the Gospels as early eyewitness testimony that can be verified externally and internally. But nonetheless, the only reason I ask, Billy, is because I've listened to a fair amount of your content, and I'm unaware of the methods that you use to try to discern between what is an accurate source historiographically and an inaccurate source historiographically.
I mean, to be fair, Wes has a point. From what I've seen, which is not much, but based on his promotion of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, he doesn't have very good discernment. Either he's frauding people or he's just really gullible. And I'm not saying that to be mean. It's just true, because things like the Emerald Tablets of Thoth are so clearly false. So I mean, Wes does have a point, and so Billy would be totally fine if he didn't say that these documents he refers to are historically accurate. If he just said, these are things that we can use as stories to symbolically understand existence in ourselves, it would be more or less pretty good, some of the stuff that Billy's saying. But the fact that he's trying to make it historically accurate is the issue.
Exactly.
Well,
Does that make sense?
I use getting in an airplane and traveling to these places, doing my own research, talking with the indigenous cultures, and researching as much of the text that is available that I can possibly find.
Okay. So I don't dispute that. And I do believe you have done that. But I mean, even from what we've talked about, so you've researched the text, but when we talked about the crucifixion, everything you cited was either, and I mean with all due respect, false in terms of the Sinai Bible, because Codex Sinaiticus is just a 4th century Greek manuscript of the Gospels that we have today, or they were verified forgeries in terms of
Yeah,
the gospel of Jesus' wife
you
and
might
the
be
gospel
right.
of Barnabas.
You may be right on that particular part of the topic, but like I said, that's less than 0.1% of the information that I hold.
Sure, but that was the original question. So yeah. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, okay, well, so I'm going off of what we've already talked about. So you said you explore the text. I don't deny that. But the evidence, by going off of what you have put forward.
So Lab Living Entertainment says Kabbalion, Morgue, I've seen you talk about it. This is ridiculous. What do you mean? What is ridiculous? I'm curious what you mean by ridiculous.
In terms of the actual documentary evidence is not just less than convincing in my respect. And I
oh, these people are ridiculous. Yeah, they're pretty ridiculous. Yeah. And so the reason why I brought that up is because I want to mention again, like when it comes to something like the Kabbalion is claimed to be this like hermetic text that's written by the three initiates that's like revealing hermetic secrets. So when it comes to the Kabbalion, that's probably not true. It was very, very, very likely written by a guy named William Walker Atkinson. However, William Walker Atkinson was a very smart guy. He wrote like 200 books or maybe even more. I don't remember. He wrote a lot of books and they're pretty good. They're pretty good. So when it comes to something like the Kabbalion, there's a lot of good information in there. Is it really a secret hermetic text written by the three initiates? Probably not, but doesn't matter. The content, I don't agree with every single bit, but a large majority of it, I think is very helpful. But that's the difference. If I were to say, oh yeah, guys, like this is definitely the secret document that was written by the three initiates and that's why it's true, that would be different.
I mean this with respect, because I think you have done a lot of research. You've traveled to these places. I have too. Like this is what I do as my career. But I'm not really getting indication because in history, we go to the primary sources in their primary languages. And when Mark asked, okay, why do you deny the crucifixion? The sources you used were not primary.
Okay, we're still talking
and
about the same thing over and over again. There's so much more we can talk about here. We're wasting a lot of time. There's so much more. That's this amount.
Do you guys
There's so much more stuff to talk about?
Do you think that all these different cultures and stuff describing these other beings, could those have been? I'm not an expert theologian or whatever, but like these stuff between demons.
First thing he does is teach people how to make knives and swords so they can cut a man's head off. You read, you see these quote unquote.
Where's that in the Book of Enoch?
In the book,
let's talk about Enoch.
Discovered or how people have written it. Do you think those could have been demons or angels? Which I don't think discredits.
I don't believe in demons or angels at all.
You don't believe in them at all?
Nah, I don't believe in demons and angels. When you read Azazel coming down in the Book of Enoch, coming down, and the first thing he does is teach people how to make knives and swords so they can cut a man's head off. You read, you see these quote unquote.
Where's that in the Book of Enoch?
It's in the Book of Enoch. You have the Watchers that come down, and there's Semyaza, Azazel, like he says. They teach humans various things. They teach humans a lot of things. They teach humans science and astrology and magic and weapons and makeup and fashion and medicine. They teach humans a lot of stuff. I don't see the Watchers as all that bad. I think that I don't look at them as being evil. I look at them as, once again, anytime knowledge is associated with the Bible, it's seen as evil. Oh, the serpent wants to give knowledge, it's evil. Oh, the Watchers want to give knowledge, it's evil. Anytime you have this the Tower of Babel, oh, people were uniting and working together, oh, that's evil. You have a lot of condemnation. Anyway, I don't see Watchers as being evil. That's not my interpretation. But anyway, I think that's as far as I know. Very much no. That's in the Book of Enoch. So I wonder why Wes is questioning that.
In the Book of Enoch, Azazel, he comes down and he teaches.
Where is that?
I don't know necessarily if it was Azazel specifically, but yeah, no, that's in the Book of Enoch for sure.
That in the Book of Enoch. Is it? The only reason I ask is because there are two Enochs: First Enoch and Second Enoch.
Yeah, there's First Enoch and Second Enoch, and I believe there's actually a third Enoch. It's in First Enoch, I'm pretty sure, and I think it's called the Book of the Watchers.
And only First Enoch is an actual historical amalgamation.
Okay. And then you analyze the fact that these angels are having sex, they're getting drunk. These are.
I'm gonna that's in the book. That's in Enoch. I think it's in First Enoch. Let's look this up real quick. Book of Enoch. Let's download a version that we can read. Complete Book of Enoch, Standard Edition. Oh, geez, that's a PDF. I want something more easily searchable. Let's see. Watchers. Yeah, okay. So this is Enoch, chapter 10. Yeah. Where's the exact quote? I want to find. Is it armor? Oh, here it is. It's right in front of my face. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working with them and bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids, makeup, and all kinds of costly stones, fashion, all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness and they committed fornication and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Yeah, this is, Billy's right here. This is Book of Enoch, and I pretty damn sure it's the first Book of Enoch. Yeah, I don't know why Wes is questioning that. Let's see if there's a reason here.
They're just people.
Whoa. Where are angels getting drunk?
Angels party. They go.
Oh, did he say they're just people? I believe that as well. So what I believe about the Watchers, and this doesn't really matter. And it could be wrong. Look, when it comes to this stuff, they're stories, so it's totally open to interpretation. Maybe they're aliens. Who knows? That's not what I personally believe. I believe that Watchers can be interpreted as souls who chose to incarnate to help humanity raise their consciousness. That is my interpretation. Am I saying that that's literally? No, I mean, it's a story, and how we use these stories to understand. See, Christianity has used these stories to condemn knowledge. Oh, they're evil. They're demons. They gave knowledge to humanity and corrupted humanity, etc. Oh, the snake is evil. They corrupted. He tempted Eve and corrupted the world. Gnostics were the exact opposites. Gnostic says the snake was a hero and Eve was a heroine for eating the apple and bringing knowledge to us. Anyway, I don't know why Wes is questioning this.
They hang out with people. They go to war with people. They put on their outfits and go to war with people. This is
where are they getting drunk though?
Wes is really nitpicking. Who cares if it's literally said they got drunk? It just says like they commit lawlessness and fornication. I don't think it literally says they got drunk, but Billy's just, I don't think that's a problem. Wes is being a little nitpicky with this here.
They get married, okay? Whatever that means. But they're having.
They don't get married.
Okay.
Wait, I'm pretty sure that it says that they take women for their they have wives. I'm almost certain. Where did that? God damn it. Sorry. I don't know what Wes is talking about here. Let's see. Yeah, look. And the angels, the children of heaven, the Watchers, saw and lusted after them and said to one another, come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men and beget us children. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each one chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them and defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms, and that's when they start teaching their wives charms, enchantments, cutting of roots, making things with plants. Yeah, it's in. Wes is off base here.
In fact, Scripture says that angels can't get married.
Merry Christmas.
Not married. Mary. Merry. But the point that I'm making here is when you start to really analyze what these angels are doing, and you start to analyze how many people are dying in the biblical text, you start to say, well, how many people did Satan actually kill? And when you start doing the tally on the numbers, God's doing most of the killing in the Bible. It's not the devil that's doing all the killing. And then God says in Isaiah, I created the good and I created the evil. Do what I say at the Lord. So he's saying that he's doing the good and the evil. Is what he's saying.
Yeah.
My personal
I mean-
opinion on this whole thing, let me get this out because we keep going over the same rhetoric over and over again. My personal opinion is that the biblical text is a good book. Like I've said, I've got videos. My number one video on Twitter has me saying this. It's good text because if you actually apply some of the information that's in the Bible, you can get a good result, like you have done, Mark.
Right.
If you interpret it esoterically and outright 100% condemn all the bullshit that's in there, because there's a lot, yeah, you can use some of the stories as archetypal, so symbolism for archetypes to, they can be helpful. But that's a big if as long as if you condemn all the horrible things in the Bible. I wouldn't call the Bible a good book. If it wasn't so damaging and people condemned anyway, you know what I think about it.
I struggle with no, I want you to finish your thought. Go ahead.
Yeah. So because you can get a good result, but there's a lot of misinformation in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of false information. There's copy information text.
Yep.
And if you go by that text, all of a sudden you end up with 400 years of slavery.
Yep.
You end up with abuse. You end up with divide and conquer tactics that separate people. You end up with people thinking that they're the chosen ones and they're the chosen people. And we've been promised this promised land so we can eradicate another race of people because this is our land, because God promised it to us. You have people that want to go on the papal inquisitions and torture and kill and murder over 80 million people.
Witch burnings,
you have, the American Holocaust, 111 million indigenous natives slayed. You have all this going on because...
I mean, I don't know what's up with Billy, but that's all good content there.
Because of this text, which is set up so contradictory throughout its path across time, you get into the New Testament, slavery is still being condoned in the New Testament.
Was it?
Honor thy slave master as you would honor God or Jesus, it says.
Yep.
I believe.
So I just read.
So,
in Ephesians.
well, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. But
he's a liar. I read that to you word for word. Wes, Mr. Huff, you, sir, are a false light.
The God of the Old Testament too.
Deceiver, get behind me, Satan.
Like I'll let you go real quick, but I'm just, and I know you have to go soon too, but I'm speaking as I challenge my own subject. It was always, I'm telling you guys, this is where Jesus came in and changed everything for me. But like the Old Testament too, it is hard for me to read.
Yeah, I would call him a snake, except that's an insult to snakes. Snakes are symbols of wisdom. He is an antichrist. He's an enemy of Christ. He's a false light. Christ would condemn someone like this. Well, Christ was pretty nice. He probably wouldn't straight up condemn them, but he would probably say, don't listen to this fucker.
Even Noah thinking God's like mad at everyone. Let's flood the whole world and murder all these people that I created.
That's pretty bad stuff.
But it seems so contradictory to, and I'm speaking, Wes, as a Christian, and I don't have the, whatever they call papyrus. There isn't. This is where people, but I continue to follow in my heart, but it's, so Jesus did not seem like that at all. But they say God's the same as them.
Antoine says, careful, he's going to come after you next, Morgue. Yeah, everyone comes after me. I don't give a shit.
And as he was now, like time, he created time. So he didn't come down, as Jesus and change and evolve and then come back with new information and be like, you know what, I don't think I'm going to flood and do. So these are more, I guess, like bigger moral questions that there's not necessarily, but that's where things like the Old Testament challenge me at times. And I know there's a lot of things.
Yeah,
where
let's
they
skip this
correlate-
guy. I'm sorry.
a
I
life
can't.
doesn't-
Obey Christ. It did say, slaves, obey your earthly masters.
Oh,
with-
yes,
More
yes.
points to what I made because he got a lot of talking in. It did say, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear as sincerity of heart as you would obey Christ. That's slaves. Obey your earthly masters with respect and fear with sincerity in your heart, just as you would obey Christ.
Wes said that wasn't in there. So let's see. I'm very curious how he tries to worm his way out of this.
So it does say that Ephesians 6:5, but there's so many
that
aspects.
stuff is
Mhm.
what
And what is the context of what Ephesians is saying? So I think this is very important because
Okay, let's hear the context of slavery. Okay, sure.
that we don't take text in isolation. So within Scripture, and this is why all the abolition movements throughout history have only been Judeo-Christian movements. There's never been an abolition movement that wasn't Christian. And actually, there's the recent work by historian Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, different Tom Holland, but his recent Dominion highlights this fact very well. This is not a Christian, but in it, he
The Bible has also been used to justify slavery. Like I said, they had a slaves Bible.
shows that going right back into the antiquity with the Cappadocian Fathers was the first abolition movement, and then into the British and the American abolition movements. These were fundamentally Christian movements ran by Christians because of the idea that when Paul, who wrote that letter to Ephesians, says, "In Christ there is no slave nor free," he's breaking down those barriers. So in Ephesians, when he says, "Slaves, obey your masters," he's operating on the socioeconomic context of what he's going on. And he's saying, hey, we have slaves and we have free people, okay? If you're a believing slave, if you're a slave who believes in Jesus as the Messiah, don't be equitable in how you are living your life. Reflect Christ accurately. And that's a movement that he is fundamentally working towards, that eventually starts to completely take out the legs.
Okay, so he raises his hand. This guy. So a couple things here. First of all, Wes straight up said that's not in the Bible. Billy Carson found the verse. It's in the Bible. Wes he didn't say, oh, my bad, or anything like that. Didn't say anything like that. He completely dodged that. Now he's trying to say, oh, well, you have to think of the context at the time. They were trying to say, like, oh, well, in those times, this is how you should act. This is how you should behave. That would be an acceptable answer. I mean, in a certain way, if the Bible wasn't considered the inspired, perfect word of God. If it was just like, oh, yeah, this is an old text, and at the time, this is what they should have said, or not should. This is how things were back then, and that's too bad. Fine, but because it says, God is obviously all-knowing and all-powerful, then and the Bible supposedly be inspired by God. So basically, it's like this. Like in the way I was taught, at least, is that the Bible was basically written by God. All the people that wrote the Bible were kind of like almost like God's pen. Like God used them to write the Bible. So it's basically the Bible is God, the word of God, God's word. And so if God is all knowing and you have something in there like that, then you would think that you would go into a lot more detail about and include a lot more content so that later on God would know later on, oh, if I don't do that, that's going to be used to justify slavery, etc. And so God should have been excruciatingly clear in the clarification. So I agree that if it's just looked at as a historical document that's a product of its times, sure. But it's the fact when you try and say this is the inerrant word of God, and you have things like, slaves and women being subjugated to men, and Eve being lesser than Adam. Like there's so much. I could just go on and on. I could write probably 1,000-page book, probably longer, on all the horrible things that have been done because of the Bible, and all the verses that contribute to that, and all the things that God, could have done differently to avoid all those issues. I really don't like that Wes. this tells me something about Wes's character. It's very interesting because so Wes, I don't trust this guy because he clearly said, no, that wasn't in the Bible. And then he said that it was, and he didn't own up to it. Same thing with the Book of Enoch. Like those things are in the Book of Enoch, more or less what Carson was saying. So I do not trust Wes's character. I think Wes is also very condescending. And look, I'll make some snarky comments about people from time to time. And, I mostly do it in jest and for fun. If I were having a conversation with them, I wouldn't be like, oh, do you know what this word means? Because I'm going to use this big word. That's mean. Don't be a dick. Because it's not being done in like a jovial way. And it's like when you're having a conversation with someone, right? You're like, okay, let's respectfully have a conversation. And so, but I'm not all on Billy's side either, because I like a lot of the stuff, the conclusions that Billy has said some cool things, but man, the stuff that he supports, like Emerald Tablets of Thoth and these different documents that are just clearly fake, but he presents as though they were true. That's very weird. I don't know much about Billy, so I don't know if it's that he's legit a fraud and just doing it to make money or something, or if he just really thinks that it's true. I hope it's the latter, to be honest. I hope that he just really thinks that it's true. Because that would suck if he was doing it to con people. Because he has some I liked a lot of the points that he's making. I don't know. Let's see.
From the Slate movement in
Hey,
general.
thanks, Beverly.
I love, by the way, I love that this is respectful. I don't feel this is all.
So someone are saying both are deceivers and someone say, yeah, like I said, what I have seen of Billy has been very suspect. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth stuff is just crazy stuff. But I'm certainly not pro Wes either. Wes is very condescending, misrepresenting a lot of things.
All just three grown-ups talking in a healthy way.
I appreciate Wes.
And I think this is going to give us but this is where you and I sitting down in the room, I would be like, great that you came to that, but like what were the methodologies did you use to conclude that him saying the slave be the master to the slave, you're able to interpret it meaning that he's meaning that? Because I was also raised in the church, and I would question when they're like, oh, in the old days when they said women don't wear jewelry, that's a sin. You would know the exact verse.
Yes.
And then they're like, oh, but that was just written because at that time that was what they did. But then the next week they're telling me, but if you believe in the Bible, you either believe in all of it or none of it. I'm like,
so he actually does have a point here. So Wes would say like women not wearing jewelry or whatever. I'm not familiar with that exact verse. It definitely sounds like something that would be in there. I know that there's a verse that says like men shouldn't have long hair, which is clearly why I'm a sinner. I mean, technically I'm non-binary, so, but in the eyes of how the church would define me, I would be a sinner. Now the thing is with Wes is that he would say, oh, like it's a product of the times. That's just how it was back then. So back then it meant something different. But I don't know this guy's name who's talking right now is absolutely right though. But then you're taught those verses are used in church to promote terrible things. And I'm sure Wes would be like, oh, well, it's not the fault of God that people misinterpret it. But God should make it very clear then. It doesn't have to be this. You can make something quite clear. You can do that. And it doesn't have to be the smoke and mirrors game. Like, oh, what do you think I mean? Do you think it still applies or not? Guess. And if you get it wrong, you're going to go to hell. It's so stupid. No.
Like, well, how come you're just...
Yes.
And they're like, but it's okay for women to do that. Now, those are the things where it's like, we've got to be honest here. Like if respectfully challenging Billy. And Billy's going to go and do
Yes.
research and be like, okay, now I want to see how to have, because we're all critical thinkers.
All right, I'm sorry, I got to say this
Those
guy.
doesn't recall. He's a
Right.
like I'm
Discipline interpretation, hermeneutics. And yeah. So there's a field, there's a discipline called hermeneutics. And that's the methodology of interpretation. So there are multiple levels that you interpret something. So whether we're dealing with, say, the Book of Ephesians, or we're dealing with Tacitus's Annals, we look at something and we contextually read it within the framework of how it's being written. So there's a historical approach where we look at the context. Okay, Paul is writing to a church in Ephesus. What's going on in Ephesus, and how is what he's saying in that city in what is modern day Turkey? How does that pertain to that particular time and framework? Where is Paul coming from? Where is
now, though, is my question. Because
yeah, so here's how I answer that question.
And I love you to death, Wes, but you're starting to give. Sorry to interrupt you. I believe in God. Like, I believe in and Billy believes in God too. I get.
No, I kind of feel bad for this guy. I don't know anything about him, but he seems nervous and come on.
Why things are challenged and things need to be challenged, but it's saying that was to women then, but being raised in the church,
so it's
and
yes
stuff,
and no.
They say, but then they'll pick something and they're like, but that doesn't apply to them now, because in that context, he was talking to this certain town where they were having problems with I'm like, well, that's not written anywhere. And they're like, well, if you go to blah, blah, blah. And then they say, well, God is all knowing. So he's
got a good, he's not getting this out well at all. Poor guy. But his point is very good. That it is very ambiguous. And if God is all knowing, he should have made it more clear. I'm pretty sure that is his point.
Perfectly chose what was in and out of the Bible.
Yeah, I'm gonna even though he has a hard, I want you guys to hear him say this again, because it is a good point.
You go to blah blah blah, and then they say, well, God is all knowing, so he perfectly chose what was in and out of the Bible. I believe whoever created the universe, which is God, in my own opinion, is way smarter than any of us. Why would he leave something like that crap in there, that women shouldn't wear jewelry and all that, and then have in the New Testament that crap doesn't really matter? Like that's where it's like, I have to believe that it's not I do think there is parts where things got written in, and I don't think they're the major things personally. Like whether or not Jesus was crucified, which I think is a major thing, because if he wasn't, that I've studied that a lot, that would challenge.
I'm sorry, I'm going to skip him, but I mean, I more or less agree with his main points.
That you think some of that
was written
in there. It's like, why?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. There is an original audience, whether that's the ancient Israelite in the ancient Near Eastern culture, or whether it's the Greco-Roman believer in Jesus within the city of Ephesus. So as historians, and I mean, most of the books on this end of my shelf.
What did he say? The Bible is written for us, but not to us? Is that what he said? Well, then why? Why? If you're gonna make a book that's confusing, why would you make a confusing book? That's one of the whole problems that I've had with that. One of the major issues that I had, and one of the major catalysts for me leaving religion, is the Bible is so ambiguous about so many different things. And why would an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God make it this smoke and mirrors game? And if you get it wrong, you're going to go to hell, when he could easily, with the snap of his fingers, make it incredibly clear. It doesn't make any sense.
Are what are referred to as commentaries.
Sorry, I got to
theologians and historians.
Would God be smart enough to know I'm not just going to write to this demographic of this civilization now, and knowing I'm a God who created the whole world, and people are still going to be studying this thousands of years later?
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, but I didn't want to cover off.
Yes.
So I'm sorry.
No. So
by the way,
here's how I would
I'm the
answer that,
worst
Mark.
interrupter ever, and it's more of my ADD type thing of like, I get a thought and I got to get it out, or else I freaking forget it. So I'm sorry about interrupting.
No.
Thanks for throwing me under the bus for that.
Yeah. So, how I would answer that is I would say this. So you do have examples of where Paul is writing, and he's writing to a particular group. And so we look at, okay, what does it mean for a woman to wear and adorn themselves with gold in a first century Greco-Roman context, right? It has to do with the fact that prostitutes would wear those things. So we need to ask the question, what is the intention of the text? So
sorry,
yes,
I gotta ask
we can
you again,
take the
though.
meaning.
But how do you interpret that's what I've been, the reason I'm interrupting you is I've heard this. I've been there, done that.
Yes.
I respect the crap out of you for how deep you go into studying the ancient texts and stuff, which is so important for the real root of it all.
These are typical Christian replies.
They've told me that same thing, and I'm like, but why doesn't it just say that he was speaking to the women and stuff that were prostitutes of that time? Like, where does that?
He's not speaking to prostitutes. He's talking about purity, and he's talking in the context of
Wes knows what he means.
When he says, don't adorn yourself with jewelry. The original audience, and we can explore this by the historical analysis.
How dumb that sounds. Saying the original audience, then
you know how dumb that sounds. Yeah, okay. You got some points. I like that.
Later on saying, but now it's okay for this audience because these women and stuff.
No, because it's the point that he's making.
I get why people like, if we're gonna, we got to be open-minded. We're punching holes in other stuff to punch holes in our own, and even if it's agreeing, like don't you think that's a little? I get what you're saying. Like if prostitutes at that right now, if prostitutes all wear a red band around their neck, and that signals what all prostitutes are. And it's like, don't wear that. A lot of prostitutes have tattoos, and a lot of women who aren't prostitutes have tattoos. Right. I don't think it's this black and white that only the prostitute, and also you're only talking about in one little town. So my bigger question would be to God.
Well, in Greco-Roman antiquity.
Like, why did you put that in the Bible? That just confuses everyone, though. Because all these other civilizations are going to be reading that. We have something we keep saying here. God didn't put that in the Bible. Men put this stuff in the Bible. I think that was some of the old. I'm telling you, Billy. It's for me. I think he'll get back. If it wasn't for. Sorry, we got you back on, Wes. Yeah. I understand what you're saying, Mark. But what I'm saying is, I think we're missing a big point here. The point that I'm trying to make here is that
was the demon trying to come out.
The Bible is written by people. Men who are extremely flawed. And the evidence of that is what they did, what they took the information that's in that biblical text and what they did with it globally to other human beings, and how they even wrote about it in the Bible, how they enslaved and tortured people in the biblical text. So in that case, even in the book of Deuteronomy, which is one of the most brutal books out there, where everything is given okay to rape women, kill children. If one person talks against your Lord, go to that town and kill the whole town, burn the town down. So brutal. It's just too much. Like I said, or turns people into salt. The killing in the Bible is not being done by Satan. That's why I don't care about. I don't believe in demons and all this other kind of stuff. Moses goes to the top. He talks to God. He gets his tablet. The first commandments are, "Thou shalt not kill." He comes down. As soon as he sees the people making a golden calf, he kills most of them. It's just like, come on. And I've learned with some of these stories how it correlated with kill your first son, related to then what happened with Jesus. But I'm still like, in my head, they're like, that's so beautiful. He was willing to sacrifice his son as God would. And I'm like, I don't believe that's so mean that God. I don't believe it's beautiful. Like,
agreed with Billy. I don't believe it's beautiful either. I'm so confused by Billy Carson. Remember, this is my first time really being exposed to him, other than the few like Emerald Tablet clips. I'm very confused because he says some really on point stuff. I really hope that the off the wall stuff that he says is because he sincerely believes it and not because he's trying to fraud people. I would like to believe that he's a good person. I hope so. Because based on some of the, I like some of what he's saying.
You have to
Jesus
understand.
changed my whole story. No, when I'm in heaven, and I don't believe God is irrational, because would be smarter than every one of us to be able to literally create everything. I would be like, God, I don't like, why would you tell that dude to kill his son?
I don't see any benefit in killing
like,
your
what-
own kid.
And then
I think-
right at the last second, he's like, no, it's cool. I was just testing.
I mean, if you think about it, like Christianity is a religion that's like all about sacrifice. It's all about sacrifice. If you look in the Old Testament, so many sacrifices of animals, sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter, telling Abraham to sacrifice his son, even though he stopped Abraham. It was a test of faith. And then you get to Christianity and God sends his son to be a sacrifice. Like the whole religion is based on sacrifice, the sacrifice of Jesus. And we're just so used to it, it becomes normalized. But it's really gross. If you understand all this stuff to be metaphorical, then it's fine, because you realize that death and resurrection is symbolic for transformation, like the phoenix, like Osiris, like so many, themes of death and resurrection is symbolic for transformation. But if you take it literally, then it's gross. It's this all-powerful being that sends his son to the world to die and be tortured because someone ate an apple.
In your faith in me. It's like that seems psychologically to me, when God's like, kill your own son, but then at the last minute,
It's sadistic.
don't do it. Oh man, you
Abraham.
proved your faith to me. I would be like,
Abraham.
God, isn't there like I don't feel like you need to do that to a person. I don't think that's such a beautiful story. And I'm talking as a Christian. There's a lot of things with the Old Testament.
It's interesting that this guy's a Christian. I would like to know more about his beliefs, because he seems very open-minded and critical of the Bible for being a Christian. And I that's fine. Like, I have nothing against Christ. I think Christ is great. I think Christ is fantastic. It's the fundamentalist interpretation of Christianity that I have an issue with. So let's continue here. I do have to use the bathroom again. I apologize. I've got a bladder condition basically, but I'll be right back. All right, let's keep going here.
I struggle with, but it doesn't change my overarching beliefs. And I think there is things that are written in, maybe misinterpreted, that you've proved. And the answer is like, to believe.
Yeah, sorry, I cut out quite a bit there, and so I think I missed a large portion, so I apologize for that.
Wes, and I'm just,
I might get to say a lot of stuff that I want to say. Go ahead.
I'll show.
Yeah, so let me just say this. So the most quoted verse of the Bible in the Bible is a version of Exodus 34:6, which fundamentally describes who God is, that he's compassionate and loving, full of grace and mercy, and abounding in steadfast love. And so, in fact, if you read the book of Jonah, the beef that Jonah has with God, the reason why he doesn't want to go to Nineveh is because he believes that God is so loving that if he tells the Ninevites to repent and they repent, God is going to forgive them. So fundamentally, we have the picture of God consistently throughout the Bible, both in the Old and New Testaments, as being a God who is rich in love and mercy and abounding in steadfast kindness. And so we want a God who is just. And
I'm curious. Hold on. Story of Jonah. Let me see if I can quickly. Yeah, that's a little misleading. So it says the word of the Lord came to Jonah and said, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. So the Lord wants Jonah to go to the city of Nineveh and basically tell them, hey, you're wicked. The Lord thinks you're wicked. And Jonah doesn't want to do that, so he runs away. Wes is saying he's running away because he believes that God is going to forgive them. And he doesn't apparently want God to forgive them. What I was always taught, I mean, it doesn't say that there. What I was always taught was that Jonah ran away because he thought that the Ninevites would like kill him because they would be mad. That, like, what are you doing coming in here telling us we're wicked? Now, to be fair, it doesn't say either way. It doesn't say that's just what I was taught. That's not in here. It doesn't say that. It just said God said to go talk to the Ninevites and tell them they're wicked, and Jonah ran from the Lord. Now, to be fair, later on, so he gets on a boat and to run away from the Lord. He gets in a boat, but then there's this storm, and the sailors are like, "What the fuck did you do to piss off God?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I was supposed to go to Nineveh," and then they throw him overboard so that the ship won't get destroyed. God being super nice and loving as always, right? And then so God has a whale come and swallow Jonah, who stays in the belly of the whale for 3 days, and then spits him up on the shore right by Nineveh. So then he does go to Nineveh, and then it's been a while since I've read these stories. I've read the Bible multiple times, so it was a long time ago. He goes and preaches to Nineveh, and God does end up sparing them. And I believe that Jonah is mad at God for sparing them. Like, why would you spare them? They're wicked. And God's like, well, they repented, so I spared them. But it doesn't say that was the reason he ran from God. I don't know. Wes has been sneaking some odd things here and there, and that just caught me as a little odd because I didn't recall that as that being the reason that he ran. Anyway.
Just to speak very briefly to the slavery issue, I mean, Leviticus 25 condemns by death the man stealing. So stealing someone and selling them into slavery. And the fact that the 10 Commandments are prefaced with, you are a nation who was slave.
It doesn't matter. If you have some verses that are like, oh, don't go steal a slave, that doesn't, but you also have verses that go, oh, if you beat your slave, it's okay as long as they don't die the next day. See, that's the thing. The thing is that the Bible kind of says everything. And so Christians can pick and choose. When they want to support something, they can turn to the verse that says, oh, here it says that slavery is bad. Then when they want, if there's someone who wants to support slavery, they can pick the verse that says slavery is good. And that's just one example. That's the thing with the Bible is that you can say there's so many, it says everything. So people close their ears to the parts that they don't want to hear and open their ears to the parts they do want to hear and pick and choose. That's the issue. So he can all day long. There's a couple verses that are empowering to women, I believe, in the Bible. It's been a long time, but I think there's a verse in the Bible where the women go up to some prophet and they're like, hey, we're not really getting a say because we're women. We should have equality. And the prophet was like, yeah, you're right. You should. And that's fine. But that doesn't discount all the other times that are like, oh yeah, go kill all the men and take the wives for yourselves. Obviously forcing yourselves on them. You know what that means. And countless atrocities. It doesn't make just because there are some good verses in there doesn't justify the bad verses. This is Christianity is not a logical system. It just bases their evidence on old documents. They go, look, we have old documents, and the old documents say this is the way we should live, so this is how we're going to live. There's no logic applied to it. And that's the issue. It's a different way of it. You can understand reality through faith. You can understand reality through the senses. You can understand reality through intuition, and you can understand reality through reason. What Christianity often does is through the senses and through faith. Senses as in historical data, and faith as in I'm going to believe in this particular thing even when there is a lack of evidence. The way I operate is a blend of, well, not all these things, not faith, but you could substitute faith with like emotion, let's say. But emotion, senses, intuition, reason, they all have their place. But when you're trying to analyze if something is objectively true or not, that's when you use reason. All these things have their intuition is what allows you to get flashes of inspiration and intuitive understandings about existence. Reason allows you to examine the intuitions and to verify if those are in fact true, or if or if they're wrong. Just because you have intuition about something doesn't mean it's automatically right. You have to examine it with reason. And anyway, that's the problem here. Christianity uses faith, emotion, and senses. When examining information, intuition and reason being the verifier, should be used when it comes to understanding truths about existence. Senses have to do with navigating the material world and practical purposes and experimentation for developing technology, stuff like that. And emotions are how we express ourselves and enjoy life and love each other, and it gives us the spark of life. When you try, all of these tools of the mind that we have a certain purpose. It's like having a spoon, a fork, a knife, and chopsticks. Each one is really good at the thing that it's, if you're eating noodles, you use chopsticks. If you're drinking soup or eating soup, you use a spoon. If, you're cutting bread, you use the knife. If you try and cut the bread with the chopsticks and eat the noodles with the spoon, you're going to have a really hard time. And so when you apply senses and emotion to understanding objective reality, it's like using a spoon to try and cut bread. It's not that there's anything wrong with the spoon. It's just that that's not what it's used for. It's used for something else. So that's the problem, is that Wes is all about sensory information, physical evidence of historical documents, and faith. Carson is like all intuition without reason. So and possibly frauding people. I don't know. That's the thing, is I don't know if he legit believes some of the stuff he says, or if he's I'm hoping that he actually believes the stuff he says and he's not frauding people. But if he does believe the stuff that he says, not that everything he says is crazy, some of the stuff that he says is good, like when he's criticizing the Bible. But when he starts talking about Thoth 36,000 years ago freezing people with his magic staff, that's a little out there and clearly not true. Billy is all intuition, not much reason. Wes is all senses and faith, when what you really need is intuition with reason, and senses can help certain aspects of that. But anyway, let's continue.
I'm the God of Israel who brought you out of Egypt. So there's a fundamental difference, and there's lots of literature on this. I would encourage people to read my friend Paul Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster? He's written some excellent stuff. He's also written on Did God Command Genocide in the Old Testament? He's a leading expert in the field of a comparative analysis of ancient
really full of himself.
literature. And so
he just brags about all his friends and what they do and the books that they write and the things that he... Sure, talk about yourself a little bit to there's nothing wrong with that. But man, just that paired with his condescending attitude and not correcting himself when he does make some slip ups. I really don't get good vibes from this guy. I'm sorry. I really don't.
There are very coherent explanations for these things, and that slavery within ancient Israel was very, very different from what slavery around the ancient Near East was
Someone said, you want to hear Bragg play Billy's response video? Yeah, I haven't seen Billy's response video. Billy could be a terrible person. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not super pro Billy. The clips I've seen of him have been pretty crazy. I've done videos talking about the Emerald Tablets of Thoth and how crazy they are. So I'm certainly not saying pro Billy. I'm just saying based on this, what I have heard here, I agree with his criticisms of the Bible. Yeah, you get what I'm saying. I'm not saying, yeah, you get it. Hopefully you get it.
And on top of that, stuff. He's also written on Did God Command Genocide in the Old Testament? He's a leading expert in the field of a comparative analysis of ancient Near Eastern war literature. And so there are very coherent explanations for these things, and that slavery within ancient Israel was very, very different from what slavery around the ancient Near East was like. And on top of that, once again, when abolition movements happen, what's that? Sorry, Billy?
I said slavery continued on throughout the Bible with no problems.
But it was always undergirded by the fact that this was not the ideal, that this was something that should not be done. And even slavery within ancient Israel was fundamentally different than slavery around the ancient Near East. This is not a contested fact. You can look at the scholarship of individuals like Wright, who's written extensively on this. He's an ancient Near Eastern ethicist. And there's vast difference between the law codes in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, and something like the Code of Hammurabi, which puts people on a tier system and gives different punishments depending on where they are within society. That's not true in ancient Israel. If you were a king and you stole somebody and you sold them into slavery, they would punish you by death.
But you steal somebody else's slave. You can't steal somebody else's slave. That's not a good thing to do, right? The point that I'm making here, I got to say something before I get out of here, is the Bible is full of contradictions. The biggest problem that we have is we're dealing with a civilization on this planet that is psychologically impaired. Human beings are psychologically impaired. This entire planet, we're living on an insane asylum. Earth.
Well, I do agree with that. We are living in an insane asylum, and it's because most people haven't learned how to think rationally and logically. Most people don't know that you can learn to think rationally and logically. They think it's just like an innate ability that people have. Like to some degree, yes. But it's like you can increase your rational and logical faculties just like you can increase muscle mass by working out. You're not automatically going to be able to, do heavy lifting unless you work out for a long time. Same thing with thinking logically and critically. You have to, and unfortunately, our school system doesn't promote logical and rational thinking. It's based on the Prussian model of the school system, which is a factory model, which is designed to create unthinking workers, consumers, and soldiers. So Carson is right, but it's just a little ironic because he believes in some really out there stuff that's easily verifiably false. Yeah, at some point, I may want to look more into Billy to try and figure out what's going on there. I'm not really, because like I said, I don't know much about him. It's very little odd to me. He may just be a very intuitive, I don't know, but then I don't know. I'm not sure. Anyway.
It was an absolute insane asylum. Mental illness has spread throughout the planet Earth like a complete virus. And when you take a text like the biblical text, no,
I don't know exactly what he means by if he means, yeah, human beings are basically in a state of ignorance, and I'm not, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them per se. It just means that we live in a world that spreads ignorance. That's what the Gnostics were talking about. They said that true evil, they said ignorance is the mother of all evil. Not sin. Sin isn't the mother of all evil. Ignorance is the mother of all evil. Yaldabaoth, the Demirgos, the chief archon, the basically devil, the Satan of Gnosticism, represented ignorance and ego. And so in that sense, right? Like in that sense, you could say that it's like we're living in an insane asylum because it is, true to some degree, depending how one, yeah. When you believe that logical and just like how we get called a cult all the time because we talk about math and logic and reason, And then Christianity is apparently this fine thing and totally acceptable when every Sunday you go in and drink the blood and eat the flesh of your Savior because of a talking snake 1,000 years ago or 6,000 years ago that had a woman eat an apple that condemned everyone to hell unless you believe in God's Son who unalived himself so that you it makes no, in that sense, yes, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy.
Knowing that human beings globally are mentally ill. This entire planet is a mental insane asylum. And I'm talking everyone. Every single, all 8 billion, whatever number of people we have now are all mentally ill. And what I mean is there's different.
Yeah, let's see what he means by that. So I would agree. I want to hear exactly what he means by that because you could take it. But yeah, in a certain sense, that's something I've said as well. I've said, hey, we're all kind of half crazy. We're all half crazy because we're going through this process of evolution. We're evolving from matter. Now, that doesn't mean we're material beings. We're soulful beings. We're souls, but we interface with this avatar that gets filtered through this mechanism that allows our thought processes to behave in a certain way. So we are all half crazy. That's why we need to prioritize logical and rational thinking along with care and empathy and make some very clear ground rules like, hey, maybe let's not kill each other. Maybe let's not, like there's just some things that are so very obvious that need to be done that it's astounding that it's been thousands and thousands of years that humanity hasn't realized these very basic things. So in that sense, yes, we are all a bit crazy. And we need to recognize that and realize that and put into place safeguards so that we don't end up oppressing and unaliving so many people. But I want to know exactly what he means by that.
Levels of mentally ill. We all have trauma that we're not dealing with. We all have internal issues. We all have situations that shadow work that needs to be done.
True.
And so, and some people are at higher levels of mental illness than others. Most of us are functional mental illness people. But when you take a look at the biblical,
I'd agree with that more or less.
Text, and you start going through this information, and it's the way that it's laid out, it becomes a proponent of more divide and conquer tactics.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It becomes a proponent of racism. It becomes a proponent of slavery. It becomes a proponent of all these things that are dark and ill, including murder and killing in the name of God, which has been done how many millions of times.
Yeah.
So my thing about the biblical text is it actually authored by the creator of the universe, or is it authored by the dark forces of, maybe, if this Satan is real, Satan himself? And the reason why I say that is because...
Yeah, so that's what the Gnostics believe. The Gnostics believe that the Bible was created by, basically inspired by Satan. And the world's first Bible, created by Saint Marcion, compiled the world's first Christian canon and left out all the Old Testament and most of the New Testament because he thought that that was inspired by an evil, violent, dark being, and that Jesus represented the truth and the light. But even some of Jesus's message got twisted by later, like disciples and apostles. So personally, I believe that the Bible was written by evil people. And not all the time. I think some of the Bible was probably written by individuals having visions or inspirations about existence and writing it metaphorically, and then later people took it literally. So I don't believe all of it's evil. I believe some of it was written in a metaphorical way to because of intuitions or experiences or revelations that individuals were having back then. And then people interpreted it as being literal rather than true. But I do think that a large part of it did have evil intentions. And at the very least, people have used it absolutely for evil intentions. So I wouldn't say that, it depends what you mean by Satan. Is the dark forces of ignorance, the dark forces of human, it's like, we don't want to pass the buck. We don't want to blame it on Satan. Look, humans fucked it up. We don't want to be like, it's not like, it was Mercury retrograde. It's not my fault. No, we got to own up to it. Like, humans did this. And the only way to do it, to fix it, is for humans to fix it. Satan didn't make us do this, and Jesus isn't going to come and save us. We as humans fucked this up, and we as humans need to fix it.
All-knowing, all-loving God, omnipotent and omniscient, that is creating not only this universe, probably most likely multiple universes, because a creator never stops creating, especially with infinite power, is now at some point going to author a text that is going to allow human beings to misinterpret it and take it in his name and begin to slay people, torture people, and enslave people worldwide, to claim that you're chosen ones, to set up a state of chosen people, and then to even claim that you have chosen land, and to torture and kill even more people, women and children, in modern times, still going on to this very day. To me, that doesn't seem like a very intelligent being, especially a being that knows the beginning and the end.
True.
So if you know the beginning and the end, you have a certain level of foreknowledge.
True.
You have advanced knowledge that goes beyond. You know what's the ending before the end even occurs. So you set up everything for success. Why? Because a genius solves problems before they happen. And I'm going to drop the mic on that.
Yeah.
With-
I like that.
With some of that too,
Yeah.
I think came back on.
Yeah.
I
gotta get to this meeting.
Yeah, there's old stuff that it's
I
hard to comprehend,
believe
but
too.
the thing that
I mean, I probably
again
wouldn't really, but I
continued
don't
to
blame him.
change my life was Jesus, and the core of it was love conquers all things.
I can't miss this.
So
This is big
yeah,
break.
keep going.
All right, brother.
We'll,
Love you.
we'll
Thank
we
you.
can do a
I
follow up.
really appreciate it, Billy. Thanks so much for interacting.
So yeah, I would
Yeah,
personally
and
love
let me
to know if
just-
it doesn't cut out a follow up on
I don't.
just out of my own curiosity, Wes, of it's
Whoa.
these are things
No.
again, like
No.
Jesus has changed everything in my studies. I mean, I was young. It's just for life. I should have let. I'm every day.
Oh God.
Like,
Oh my God.
Stupid.
Oh Jesus.
Come on.
It was described. I mean, you look at Jesus saying things like, "But I say to you, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse."
Okay, so question for you guys. I think we should wrap it up there. I'm not really interested in hearing more from Wes. What do you guys think? Are we good? Do you guys want to hear more of this guy, or are we good here? I think it's pretty good. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, I think we're good. I think we're good. Okay, so a couple things I want to say here.
Curse you,
Oh, let me
for those who
be quiet, Wes. So that was interesting. That was actually quite different. So actually, here's my takeaway from this. Wes pretty much came across how I thought he was going to come across. I pretty much, yeah, like this is very typical Christian responses. He's a little more condescending than I thought he would be. But as far as content, pretty much that's what I expected. As far as Billy goes, Billy said much better things than I expected, to be honest. I have a bit more respect for him. That being said, though, please keep in mind, this is my only exposure to Billy other than a few short videos on Emerald Tablets of Thoth. So I'm very up in the air about this person. He had some very good things to say about he was in his criticism of the Bible, totally on point. The documents that he believes in, it's very weird. So I totally agree with the criticisms of the Bible. I don't know what's going on there though, like, because he does believe in some very wild, easily verifiably false stuff. So I don't know if he just legitimately believes it or if he's trying to fraud people. I really hope he's not. I would be more inclined to think he really believes it. But I don't know. So anyway, I just want to point that out. Those are my thoughts. Wes is clearly, very, very typical. Billy had some, I would still say if you listen to Billy Carson, fine. I'm not telling you don't listen to Billy, but please be careful because he does promote stuff that is clearly factually just straight up wrong, like the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. And if he were to say that these were just symbols and stories, but no, he promotes it as though they were historically correct. He even says like, oh, the Bible just copied the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. And that's great. No, it didn't. That's not true, and easily verifiably not true. So interesting for people saying that like Wes destroyed Billy. I wouldn't say that's the case. I think that Wes gave a better performance and is much more articulate in terms of rhetoric, in terms of sounding good and sounding convincing. He can sound convincing to perhaps people who don't really know much about this stuff. But Billy did have some really crazy ideas as well that, you know, especially with the documents he was talking about. So all in all, like, look, when it comes down to this stuff, just please be careful. Use logic and reason, question everything, examine everything, think for yourself, and do your research. Like if someone says the Emerald Tablets of Thoth are real, please don't just believe they're real. Go do a little Googling. You know, like I said, Emerald Tablets of Thoth, you can find out they're false in like 10 minutes, if that even. So you know, make sure you're being careful. And ultimately, when it comes to this stuff, like I said, I take a psychological, esoteric, and philosophical approach. What matters with these stories is not whether they're historically accurate or they actually happened, but what we can learn from them and the powers that it lets us tap into. Great example of that is like the story of Lilith. The story of Lilith comes from a medieval document that's, you know, not in the Bible. It's not what and where it comes from was kind of like a joke manuscript. I don't know if it was a joke, it just wasn't a very serious manuscript. But anyway, that doesn't matter because it represents a real force, a true force. Like Lilith is real and alive within all of us. And all these archetypes are alive and real within all of us. They just represent, the symbols just are different ways of representing them. It's like an app. Your app, you can take your app and change its icon to whatever you want. You can change the icon to anything, but the app still does what the app does. These stories, these metaphors are like different images. The program underneath is the same. The program of rebellion and liberation can take the face of Lilith, can take the face of Lucifer, can even take the face of Christ as rebelling against the Creator God. You know, different masks, different personas that are worn represent an underlying structure. Anyway, that's my point there. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments if you want to see more stuff like this. Very interesting. I was surprised. It mostly by some of the stuff Carson said. I thought he had some great criticisms of the Bible. I was happy that he said some of that stuff that he said to Wes. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought. And, you know, like I said, check out my book if you want to know more about how to understand your mind and get rid of limiting belief thoughts and structures so that you can think logically and clearly and think for yourself and become the creator of your own life in your own mind rather than being a product of culture or religion or society or friends or family or all the bullshit around us. The link is in the description of this video, or you can get access to my audiobook as well. It's in the description of this video. And become a member if you want to help get this, you know, spread the information on this channel. On membership, you get access to our members only videos, as well as my lecture notes on different topics. Right now, it's on alchemy, the symbolic interpretation, of course. And yeah, thank you all very much. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports, let's see, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nusalina, Dallas, Digital, David, LaDonna, Grace, Kira, Valthor, and everyone else. Thank you very much.